Hello guys, welcome to Fiction Quest. So in this video, we will see, what if Naruto joined the Straw Hats and accidentally created a harem with Nami and Robin? If you enjoy these kinds of stories, don't forget to show us some love by hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel. Your support means the world to us. Now, let's start the story. C. Chapter 1. The Maelstrom in the Calm Belt. The world ended in a scream of light and sound. One moment, Naruto Uzumaki was a whirlwind of gold and orange, a living sun holding back the ravenous, all cons. Umming darkness of a foe that made Kagaya look like a distant memory. His every cell screamed with the combined power of the Sage of Six Paths and the indomitable will of Kurama. He had pushed beyond his limits, then pushed further still, creating a Rasengan that held the raw, chaotic energy of a star being born. His enemy, a pale being of silent, terrifying power from beyond the veil of their dimension, had met it with a jutsu that didn't destroy, but unraveled. Space-time twisted. The very fabric of reality groaned, tearing like old parchment. There was a sensation of being pulled through the eye of a needle. Of his body and soul being shredded into infinite particles and then slammed back together in the wrong order. Colors he had no names for bled into sounds that defied physics. He felt the frantic, panicked roar of Kurama in his soul, a desperate anchor in a sea of non-existence, and then, nothing. Silence. It was the silence that woke him. A profound, unnatural quiet that pressed in on him from all sides. His first conscious thought was of the water. It was warm, impossibly still, and held him in a gentle, almost lazy embrace. He floated on his back, the sky above a canvas of the most brilliant, cloudless blue he had ever seen. There was no wind, no waves, no birdsong, just the vast, empty sky and the dead calm sea. He pushed himself into a sitting position on the water's surface. His chakra control instinctual even in his exhaustion. His body ached with a depth he hadn't felt since he first learned the Rasenshuriken. A quick mental check revealed the damage. His chakra reserves were scraped dry. The dregs barely enough to keep him afloat. His orange and black jacket was in tatters, the spiral on its back ripped clean through. He was alone. Naruto closed his eyes, extending his senses. He tried to feel for the familiar life energy of his homeland, for the thrum of the elemental nations. He found nothing. The natural energy here was different, wilder, untamed, and yet strangely passive. It was like trying to breathe in an atmosphere with the wrong mix of gases. It sustained, but it didn't nourish. Beneath him, in the crushing depths of the blue water, he felt things. Massive, slumbering presences, their life forces colossal but dormant. They were like mountains that just happened to be alive. They paid him no mind, and for that, he was grateful. Panic, cold and sharp, tried to claw its way up his throat. He ruthlessly suppressed it. He was Naruto Uzumaki, the hero of the Fourth Great Ninja War. He had faced down gods and monsters. Panic was a luxury he couldn't afford. First, assess. Second, plan. Third, act. He was lost. That much was certain. The energy that had cast him here felt final, a door slammed shut and locked from the other side. He was adrift in an unknown world, a ghost of a war that no one here had ever fought. For a long moment, the sheer, crushing weight of that loneliness threatened to drown him more surely than any ocean. He thought of Sasuke, of Sakura, of Kakashi-sensei. He thought of Hinata and the peaceful life he was just beginning to imagine. A bitter taste filled his mouth. It was then that he saw it. A splash of impossible color on the horizon. A ship, he realized, but it was unlike any vessel he could have imagined. It was bright and cheerful, with a deck of vibrant green grass and a sail emblazoned with a skull wearing a straw hat. Its figurehead was a beaming, sunny lion, its mouth open in a happy roar. It was the most ridiculous, out-of-place thing in this desolate sea, a child's drawing brought to life. And it was heading right for him. On the deck of the Thousand Sunny, it was a day like any other in the Calm Belt. That is to say, it was unnervingly quiet and mind-numbingly boring. Monkey D. Luffy, captain and human rubber band, was sprawled on the lion's head, a fishing line dangling limply in the water. Usopp was below deck, meticulously crafting a new type of explosive pellet that smelled vaguely of burnt hair and regret. Sanji was in the galley, humming a tune as he planned a lavish afternoon snack, his mind a whirlwind of culinary delights and romantic overtures for the ladies of the crew. Nami stood on the upper deck, leaning over her cartography table. She sketched the horizon with practiced ease, her brow furrowed in concentration. The calm belt was a navigator's nightmare, a place where maps were more suggestion than rule, but that only made her more determined to chart it perfectly. Beside her, Nico Robin sat in a lounge chair, a thick, leather-bound book resting in her lap. She read with a placid smile, seemingly unbothered by the oppressive stillness that drove the rest of the crew to distraction. In the crow's nest, Zoro was engaged in his third nap of the day, his three swords resting faithfully by his side. Man in the water. The shout came from the reindeer-human hybrid currently serving as the ship's doctor, Tony Chopper. His little hooves clattered against the wood as he pointed frantically off the starboard bow. All at once, the ship burst into life. Luffy's head snapped up, his eyes wide with curiosity. A man. Is he interesting? He's not moving, Chopper cried, his voice pitched high with panic. He might be hurt. That was all it took. In a flash of stretching limbs, Luffy launched himself over the railing, his rubber arms snagging mast and slingshotting him toward the figure in the water. He landed with a soft splash, grabbing the back of the stranger's tattered jacket. Got him, he yelled, his voice echoing across the silent sea. A few minutes later, the stranger was laid out on the grassy deck. The crew gathered around, their usual boisterous energy replaced by a cautious curiosity. He was young, perhaps around Luffy's age, with sun-kissed blonde hair that stuck up in every direction. The most peculiar features were the three faint, whisker-like marks on each of his cheeks. He was dressed in torn black pants and the remains of a garish orange jacket. Chopper was already in full doctor mode, his small hooves gently prodding the unconscious man. He's alive, no broken bones, but he's severely exhausted. And, this is strange. He pressed a hoof to Naruto's abdomen. His internal energy is bizarre. It's like a storm, all coiled up. I've never seen anything like it. Nami crossed her arms, her expression wary. He was just floating out here, in the middle of the calm belt. Alone, she glanced at the placid water. Where are the Sea Kings? Zoro, now awake and alert, rested a hand on the hilt of his Wado Ikimonji. He's not normal, that's for sure. I can feel it. There's something powerful about him. Robin closed her book, her gaze analytical and deeply intrigued. The markings on his cheeks are fascinating. I've never encountered such a physiological trait in any of my studies. She looked at the shredded spiral on his jacket. A spiral, a symbol of eternity, or perhaps chaos. Suddenly, the stranger's eyes snapped open. They were a startling, piercing blue, as deep and clear as the sky above. In a single, impossibly fluid motion, he pushed himself from a lying position into a low crouch. It wasn't the clumsy movement of someone waking up, it was the coiled readiness of a predator. His eyes darted from face to face, assessing, cataloging. Luffy, the stretchy boy. Zoro, the swordsman. Nami, the navigator with the strange staff. Robin, the quiet woman with knowing eyes. Sanji, the cook with the curly eyebrow. Usopp, the long-nosed one trying to look brave. Chopper, the talking reindeer. It was a crew of misfits if he'd ever seen one. It was almost familiar. Where am I? Naruto's voice was raspy, dry from the salt and disuse. Before anyone could answer, the ship lurched violently. The very sea began to churn. The dead calm broken as if a god had thrown a stone into a pond. A shadow fell over the thousand sunny, vast and absolute, eclipsing the sun. Nami paled, her eyes wide with terror as she stared at the water. No, it can't be. From the depths, it rose. A serpent of impossible scale, its head wider than the sunny was long. Its skin was a mottled green and brown, like ancient, moss-covered rock. Its eyes were baleful yellow saucers, each one the size of a small boat, and its mouth, lined with teeth like daggers of ivory, opened in a silent, world-ending roar. It was a lord of the coast, a creature of myth. A sea king so massive it made other sea kings look like eels. It had been drawn from its slumber by the sudden, explosive flare of a life force utterly alien to its world. Everyone, battle stations. Zoro bellowed, his three swords already drawn and gleaming in the dim light. Sanji's leg was already wreathed in flame. I'll turn that overgrown lizard into steak for a year. Luffy's grin was wide and manic, a mix of genuine excitement and the grim determination of a captain protecting his ship. Gum gum. But they all stopped. The stranger, the blonde boy, had gotten to his feet. He looked at the colossal beast, then back at the crew scrambling to defend their home, to defend him. A flicker of something ancient and powerful ignited in his blue eyes. He would not let these people, who had just saved him from the sea, die for him. That was not his way. Stay back, Naruto said, his voice no longer raspy but imbued with a strange, resonant power. He stepped to the railing of the ship, the orange pigmentation of sage mode bleeding around his eyes in an instant. The air around him crackled, the untamed natural energy of this world rushing toward him. Obeying a command it had never before heard. The Straw Hats could feel it, a sudden, crushing pressure, as if the atmosphere itself had gained weight. Naruto held out his right hand, palm up. A sphere of brilliant blue energy, no bigger than his fist, appeared above it, spinning with a sound like 1,000 shrieking birds. But it didn't stop there. It grew, fed by the raw power Naruto was pouring into it. It swelled from the size of a ball to the size of a boulder, then to the size of a small house, the sea below it boiling from the sheer density of the energy. It was a miniature sun, a captive typhoon, a spiraling vortex of absolute destruction held in the palm of one man. The Straw Hats were frozen, their own planned attacks forgotten. They could only stare, their minds struggling to comprehend the scale of what they were witnessing. This wasn't a technique, it was a cataclysm. Giant Rasengan. Naruto roared. He didn't throw it, he leapt. His body became a golden blur, closing the impossible distance between the ship and the Sea King in the blink of an eye. He met the monster's head, which was descending to swallow the sunny hole, and slammed the roaring sphere of energy into its thick hide. The impact was absolute. There was no grand explosion, no fireball. There was only a deafening shriek of wind and a blinding flash of blue light. The Rasengan didn't explode, it expanded, grinding everything in its path into nothingness. The Sea King's colossal head, the size of an island, was simply erased. The vortex of power continued, drilling a hole through the water itself, creating a temporary whirlpool that reached down into the dark, crushing depths of the calm belt. And then, silence returned. The sea, -1 gargantuan monster, slowly settled. The whirlpool filled. The sun came back out. On the deck of the Thousand Sunny, no one moved. No one breathed. They stared at the empty space where a living mountain had been moments before. Luffy's jaw was on the deck, his eyes replaced with literal, sparkling stars. Usopp had fainted, foam bubbling at his lips. Sanji's cigarette had fallen from his mouth. Zoro's grip on his swords was so tight his knuckles were white. He recognized a power that was not born of swords or fists or tricks, but something else entirely, something on the level of Mihawk or an admiral, maybe even beyond. Nami trembled, her face ashen. She had seen Enel's lightning and Crocodile's sandstorms, but this was different. This was the power to unmake things. Robin, for the first time since the Buster call on Ohara, felt a sliver of genuine, primal fear. It was mingled with an insatiable, scholarly curiosity. What was he? Naruto landed softly back on the deck, the golden light of sage mode receding. He swayed, the massive expenditure of chakra finally taking its toll. He dropped to one knee, breathing heavily. See, he managed, a weak, cheeky grin on his face. All taken care of. The shock was shattered by Usopp's returning consciousness, which manifested as a piercing shriek. Ships. Multiple ships on the horizon. He pointed a trembling finger past where the Sea King had been. And they're flying marine flags. Sure enough, a fleet was bearing down on them. 10 ships, at least, led by a larger, more menacing vessel with the markings of a vice admiral. They had been drawn by the same beacon as the Sea King, the sudden, impossible eruption of Naruto's chakra. On the prow of the lead ship stood Vice Admiral Kato, a man carved from granite and cynicism. His arms were crossed over his chest, his jaw set. His observation haki was screaming at him, telling him that the source of that world-shaking energy was concentrated in a single being on that ridiculous pirate ship. It felt like staring into the sun. This was not a pirate to be captured. This was a force of nature to be contained. All ships, Kato's voice boomed across the water, amplified by a den mushi. Target the pirate vessel. Open fire. Do not let them escape. Cannonballs, black spheres of iron and death, began to arc through the air. The straw hats, shaken but not broken, snapped back into their well-oiled combat rhythm. Frankie. Coup de burst. Nami yelled. No good. Nami sis. Not enough cola, and we're still too close. The cyborg shipwright yelled back from below deck. Zoro and Sanji moved to the railings, ready to deflect the incoming barrage. Luffy began to inhale, preparing an attack. But they were too slow. The first volley was already upon them. Except it wasn't. Naruto was gone. One moment he was kneeling on the deck. The next he was a blur of yellow and black, appearing on the deck of the Vice Admiral's ship as if he had teleported. The Marines standing guard stared in disbelief, their rifles half raised. Kato didn't flinch. He had seen strange abilities before. His fists darkened, coated in the metallic sheen of armament hockey. So, the monster shows itself. He charged, his speed belying his size. In the name of the world government, you are under arrest. His punch carried the force of a cannonball, aimed directly at Naruto's chest. Naruto didn't block, he simply shifted his weight, letting the punch graze past his side. His hand came up, open-palmed, and gently tapped Kato's extended elbow. The Vice Admiral's momentum was instantly redirected, sending him stumbling past. Kato spun, his other fist swinging. Naruto ducked under it, his movements fluid and economical. He wasn't fighting. He was dancing, flowing around the Vice Admiral's brutal, straightforward attacks like water around a stone. It was a display of pure, unadulterated taijutsu, honed in 1,000 life or death battles. He didn't need grand, destructive techniques for this. This was a conversation, and he was speaking a language of skill that Kato could barely comprehend. Frustrated, Kato roared and threw a flurry of hockey-infused punches. From the sunny, it looked like Naruto was surrounded. But then, there were two of him. A perfect duplicate appeared behind Kato, a simple shadow clone. Kato, sensing the new presence, spun around to attack it, leaving his back exposed to the real Naruto for a fraction of a second. It was all the time he needed. Naruto's hand shot out, not in a punch, but in a precise, two-fingered strike to the side of Kato's neck. There was a soft tap. The Vice Admiral's eyes rolled back into his head, and the powerful Marine, a veteran of the Grand Line, crumpled to the deck, unconscious but completely unharmed. The Marines on the ship were frozen in terror. This blonde demon had appeared out of nowhere, casually dispatched a monster that could have swallowed their entire fleet, and then neutralized a Vice Admiral without even breaking a sweat. Naruto stood over the fallen officer, his gaze sweeping over the terrified soldiers. His expression wasn't angry or menacing. It was just weary. Leave, he said, his voice quiet but carrying an authority that brooked no argument. Tell your leaders what you saw. But for now, just go. No one needed to be told twice. A panicked scramble ensued as Marines rushed to retrieve their commander. Orders were shouted, and within minutes, the entire fleet was turning around. Retreating at full speed, leaving the 1,000 Sunny alone once more in the silent, bloodless water. Naruto's form flickered, and he was back on the Sunny's deck. The borrowed strength from the natural energy faded, and the bone-deep exhaustion from his dimensional ordeal slammed back into him with the force of a freight train. His vision swam, and his knees buckled. This time, he didn't stop himself from falling. When he awoke again, he was in a small, clean room filled with medical charts and strange instruments. The talking reindeer was checking his pulse, a look of intense concentration on his face. "Oh, you're awake," Chopper said, relieved. "Don't try to move. You're suffering from severe, well, I'm calling it, energy exhaustion. I've never seen anything like it." The door opened, and the whole crew piled in, cramming themselves into the small infirmary. They looked at him with a new kind of expression, a mixture of profound awe, a healthy dose of fear, and a burning, desperate curiosity. It was Nami who spoke first, her voice tight. "What are you?" Naruto pushed himself up, wincing. "My name is Naruto Uzumaki. I'm a shinobi, from a place called Konoha." He looked at their blank faces. "I don't think you've heard of it." Robin stepped forward, her dark eyes unblinking. "Your power. It is not a devil fruit, nor does it feel like hockey. It felt elemental, alive. Naruto managed a faint smile. It's called chakra, and some help from the natural energy around us. There was a moment of silence as they all tried to process this. A man from another land, wielding an entirely new form of power, had fallen from the sky and into their lives. Then, Luffy, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, pushed his way to the front. He had a grin on his face so wide it seemed to split his head in two. It was the purest expression of sincerity and excitement Naruto had ever seen. That was so cool, the rubbery captain exclaimed, vibrating with energy. First you went all shiny. And then you made that big spinny ball, and then you went whoosh and beat up that boring marine guy. I've never seen anything like it. Luffy leaned in close, his face inches from Naruto's. You're super strong, and you seem like a good guy. Join my crew. The offer hung in the air, simple and direct. The others looked at their captain, then at Naruto, waiting. Nami looked ready to protest. To talk about the dangers, the unknowns. Zoro just watched, his arms crossed, a flicker of a challenge in his eye. Naruto looked into Luffy's eyes. He saw no calculation, no attempt to use his power. No fear. All he saw was an open invitation. He looked around the room at the strange, chaotic, but fiercely loyal group of people who had found him, saved him, and were now offering him a place among them. He was alone, adrift, a warrior without a war or a home. Maybe he didn't have to be. A genuine, tired smile touched his lips. It was the first real smile he'd had since his world had ended. Okay, he said, deep within the holy land of Mary Geoise, in a chamber untouched by sunlight and forgotten by modern history, a sound echoed for the first time in 800 years. It was not a bell or a horn, but a deep, resonant chime, like a celestial body striking a perfect note. In the center of the circular room, a massive orrery of sea prism stone and polished gold shuddered to life. Intricate rings representing the four blues and the grand line began to rotate, and ancient glyphs carved into its surface flared with a brilliant, ethereal blue light. A set of heavy doors slid open, and a figure in immaculate white and gold robes strode into the room. His name was Grand Warden Tiberius, a man whose existence was known only to the five elders. His face was placid, framed by silver hair, but his eyes held the cold, unwavering conviction of a zealot. He walked to the humming device, his gaze falling upon the glowing glyphs. They pulsed with a steady rhythm, spelling out a single, dreaded word from the language of the void century. Anomaly. Tiberius placed a hand on the cool surface of the orrery, feeling the alien energy it was detecting, a tear in the fabric of their reality. He closed his eyes, his expression grim. So, the prophecy of the cataclysm begins anew, he murmured, his voice a low whisper in the echoing chamber. He turned, his placid expression hardening into one of absolute resolve. The cycle will not be repeated. Not this time. He raised his voice, and it carried with it the weight of a sacred duty. Awaken the arbiters. Find the source of this disruption. The order must be preserved. Chapter 1 End. Chapter 2. The Fox and the Cat Burglar. The thousand sunny cut through the waves, leaving the oppressive silence of the calm belt far behind. A fresh, salty wind filled its sails, a welcome and boisterous sound that seemed to scrub the very air clean. For 2 days, the ship had been a whirlwind of questions and cautious observation. Naruto, for his part, answered what he could. He spoke of chakra, of shinobi, of a great tree and a village hidden in its leaves. To the Straw Hats, it was a tale as fantastical as any they'd heard from Usopp. Yet they had seen the proof of it floating in the water where a Sea King used to be. He was a surprisingly easy presence on the ship. He laughed loudly at Luffy's antics, listened with genuine interest to Frankie's explanations of the ship's mechanics, and ate Sanji's cooking with a religious fervor that rivaled their captain's. He sparred with Zoro, a blindingly saint display of taijutsu against swordsmanship that ended in a draw and a mutual, grudging respect. He was, in short, becoming part of the crew's chaotic rhythm. Yet, a palpable tension remained, and its source was Nami. The ship's brilliant navigator treated him with a polite, professional distance. She would watch him from the corner of her eye as he trained, her expression unreadable. To her, Naruto was a variable she couldn't chart, a living storm of power that could capsize their journey at any moment. Power like his drew attention, the kind that leveled islands and ended dreams. It reminded her too much of Arlong. Of the crushing, absolute strength that had shackled her for years. She wasn't afraid of Naruto himself. His easy smile and occasional bouts of cluelessness made that difficult. But she was terrified of the shadow his power cast. Land ho! Usopp's voice from the crow's nest was a welcome interruption. They were in desperate need of supplies. The impromptu battle with the Ma Rhine fleet had used up more resources than planned, and Sanji's pantry was beginning to look tragically bare. The island on the horizon, Port Felicity, looked promising. It was a bustling hub, its harbor filled with merchant vessels and its white-walled city climbing gracefully up the side of a green hill. It gleamed in the afternoon sun, a picture of prosperity. Looks like a good place to stock up, Nami said, her eyes scanning the port through a spyglass. Her voice was all business. The currents are stable, we can dock without any trouble. Luffy, try not to punch anyone important for at least an hour. Got it. No punching important people for 60 minutes. Luffy declared with the solemnity of a sacred vow. As the Sunny docked, the facade of prosperity began to crack. The people in the streets moved with a listlessness. Their shoulders slumped. The merchants in the market stalls haggled with a quiet desperation. And everywhere, there were the enforcers. They were broad-shouldered, men and women in matching black leather armor, their belts stamped with the emblem of a gauntlet clutching a coin. They didn't act like Marines or government officials, they moved with the swagger of licensed thugs. Sanji had gone into town to buy provisions, while Robin and Chopper searched for a bookstore. Naruto, Luffy, and Usopp were tasked with the simple job of finding a place to refill their water casks. It was during this task that the true nature of Port Felicity was laid bare. A young boy, no older than 10, accidentally bumped into one of the leather-clad enforcers, spilling a crate of apples. The enforcer, a man with a cruel sneer and a scar that split his eyebrow, backhanded the boy across the face, sending him sprawling. "Watch where you're going, you little rat. Those are Governor Rodrigo's apples. That'll be a 10,000 belly fine for damages." The boy's mother rushed forward, her face pale with terror. "Please, sir, it was an accident. We don't have that kind of money." "Then I guess I'll be taking your stall as collateral," the enforcer said, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword. Before the woman could even plead, a blur of motion intervened. Luffy was there, his straw hat shadowing his eyes. His hand clamped around the enforcer's wrist in a grip of iron. "Hey," Luffy said, his voice dangerously low. He said he was sorry. Naruto was right behind him, his easygoing demeanor gone, replaced by a cold stillness that was somehow more menacing than Luffy's anger. The air around him felt heavy. The enforcer tried to wrench his arm free, but it was like pulling against a sea anchor. "Who the hell do you think you are? We're the Collectors Guild. We work for the governor." The confrontation drew a crowd, but they kept their distance, their faces a mixture of fear and a desperate, flickering hope. From a nearby alley, Nami watched, having followed them to make sure they stayed out of trouble. Her heart hammered against her ribs. This was exactly what she had feared. She was about to intervene, to try and de-escalate, when the situation resolved itself. Sanji appeared, a lit cigarette dangling from his lips. He moved with a lazy grace, placing a small, heavy sack of coins on a nearby barrel. "My apologies, good sir," Sanji said, his voice smooth as silk. "My oafish captain sometimes forgets his manners. Please, allow us to cover the damages for the spoiled fruit." He gave the enforcer a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "And perhaps a little extra for your trouble." The enforcer's eyes darted from Luffy's unyielding grip to Naruto's unnerving stare. Then to the sack of coins. Greed won out over pride. He snatched the bag. "Fine. Just keep your freaks on a leash." He shoved past them and swaggered off down the street. The moment he was gone, the tension broke. Nami rushed out. "What were you three thinking? Are you trying to get us thrown in jail, or worse?" Luffy just shrugged. He hit a kid. Naruto's eyes were still on the enforcer's retreating back. "People like that," he said, his voice quiet. "They're the same everywhere." Later that evening, in the Sunny's galley, the story came out. Sanji, using his charm and a few free samples of his cooking, had gotten the whole story from a terrified baker. Governor Don Rodrigo ran the island like his personal piggy bank. He levied taxes on everything, on docking, on selling, On breathing, it seemed. The Collectors Guild was his private army of bounty hunters, led by a cunning strategist named Silas, who ensured every last belly was squeezed from the populace. The people lived in a state of perpetual debt and fear. As Nami listened, her knuckles turned white where she gripped her cup. The cheerful map room, the thrill of adventure, all of it fell away, replaced by the ghost of a small, orange-haired girl drawing maps in a dusty room, buying her village's freedom one stolen coin at a time. The smell of Arlong's cigar smoke and the weight of his impossible demands filled her senses. It was the same story, just a different island, a different tyrant. He keeps it all in a vault, she said, her voice a low, dangerous whisper. In the treasury of his mansion on the hill. All the money he's stolen from these people. Luffy slammed his fist on the table. All right, let's go kick this governor's butt and get everyone's money back. No, you idiot, Nami snapped, her eyes flashing. You can't just charge in there. That mansion is a fortress, and the Collectors Guild is full of professional bounty hunters. Silas, their leader, is supposedly a genius. We'd be walking into a trap. She stood up, a familiar, predatory glint in her eyes. This isn't a job for brute force. This is a job for a professional. I'm going to steal it all back. She retreated to her workshop, unrolling fresh parchment and beginning to sketch. This was her domain. She mapped the town, marking the guild's patrol routes, the mansion's potential weak points, the times of the changing of the guard. It was a complex, beautiful equation of stealth and timing, and she was its master. She saw Naruto as a complication, a nuke in a situation that called for a scalpel. She'd figure out I'd use him, maybe as a last resort diversion, but this was her plan, her fight. Her first move was to scout the mansion's perimeter herself. Under the cover of darkness, clad in dark clothes, she ed like a shadow through the manicured gardens. Her goal was simple. Place a specially designed, miniature den mushi near a window of the guards' barracks to listen in on their rotations. She was silent, she was precise. She was the best cat burglar on the seas. And she walked right into a trap. As her fingers brushed against the windowsill, a fine, nearly invisible wire snagged her ankle. A net, weighted with sea prism stone shavings to negate devil fruit powers, shot up from the ground, enveloping her and hoisting her 10 feet into the air. Floodlights snapped on, bathing the garden in harsh, white light. From the shadows of a nearby gazebo, a man stepped out, clapping slowly. He was tall and lean, with silver hair tied back in a neat tail. He wore the leather armor of the guild, but his was more ornate, tailored. This was Silas. Nami, the cat burglar, with a bounty of 66 million, he said, his voice calm and analytical. He consulted a bounty poster in his hand. An impressive navigator and a thief of considerable skill. I must admit, I'm a little disappointed. A simple tripwire. I expected more from a member of Straw Hat Luffy's crew. Nami's heart pounded. She hadn't been this helpless since Arlong Park. How did you know? We monitor all incoming ships with bounties. When I heard the Straw Hats had docked, I cross-referenced your known associates and psychological profiles, he explained. As if discussing the weather. You, Nami, have a documented history of liberating towns from tyrants. It was the most logical course of action to assume you would target the governor. So, I simply reinforced the most obvious infiltration points and waited. He drew a short, wicked-looking blade. Now, I believe the governor will pay handsomely to make an example of you. Suddenly, a voice cut through the night, casual and unconcerned. Hey, you're that Silas guy, right? Pretty smart, setting a trap like that. Silas spun around, leaning against a tree just outside the glare of the floodlights was Naruto. He had his arms crossed, a relaxed smile on his face. He hadn't been sneaking. He'd just appeared. Silas hadn't sensed him. None of his guards had. And you are? Silas asked, his hand tightening on his blade. This was the variable he couldn't account for. The boy from the water. No bounty, no records. Just a friend, Naruto said. He pushed off the tree. Look, I get it. You're doing your job, but my friend there, she's kind of important to our crew. So I'm gonna have to ask you to let her go. Silas laughed, a short, sharp bark. You and what army? Naruto's smile widened. Funny you should ask. He made a simple cross-shaped sign with his fingers. Shadow clone jutsu. Poof, poof, poof poof poof. In a series of soft, smoky explosions, the garden was filled. 10, then 20, then 50 Narutos appeared, each one a perfect, solid replica. They lounged on the roof, sat in the trees, leaned against the walls, all of them grinning at the stunned bounty hunters. Silas's professional calm finally shattered. His eyes were wide with disbelief. What is this devilry? One of the clones appeared directly behind him and chopped the rope holding the net. Nami fell, and the original Naruto caught her effortlessly. You okay? He asked, setting her on her feet. She could only nod, her mind reeling. Good. He turned back to the pale-faced Silas. We'll be leaving now. Don't try to follow. He and Nami vanished into the darkness, leaving Silas and his men surrounded by a small army of grinning blonde shinobi who, a moment later, all disappeared in harmless puffs of smoke. Back on the sunny, Nami was pacing the deck, humiliated and furious. Her perfect plan had failed at the first step. She had been caught, and she had needed to be rescued like some damsel in distress. Naruto found her there, leaning against the railing. He didn't say, "I told you so." He didn't gloat. He just stood beside her, looking out at the lights of the city. He's smart, Naruto said quietly. That Silas guy, he thinks ahead. He made a fool of me, Nami muttered, her fists clenched. No, he didn't, Naruto countered. He set a good trap, and you stepped in it. It happens. Back where I'm from, we called it a learning experience. He turned to her, his blue eyes serious. Your plan was good, you just didn't have enough pieces on the board. So, let's get you some more. He led her to the galley, where she had left her maps and notes scattered on the table in her anger. He picked up the main schematic of the mansion. Okay, navigator, he said, his tone respectful. Explain it to me, from the top, every detail. Hesitantly at first, then with growing confidence, she did. She explained the guard patrols, the pressure plates she'd suspected, the location of the treasury. The blind spots in their surveillance. She laid out her entire, intricate plan for a multi-stage heist. Naruto listened, nodding, his full attention on her. He wasn't judging, he was absorbing. When she was finished, he tapped the map. Okay, he said, this is a good plan. A great plan, actually. It's just missing one thing, an army of me. For the next hour, they retooled the entire operation. It was no longer Nami's heist, it was their heist. Her intricate knowledge of stealth and misdirection was now paired with Naruto's ability to be in 100 places at once. His clones wouldn't be a wrecking ball, they would be her scalpels, her spies, her decoys. He let her be the general, the brilliant strategist in the command tent. He was simply her ultimate field agent. A strange, exhilarating energy sparked between them, a meeting of two vastly different but equally sharp minds. The following night, Operation Reclaim Felicity began. Phase 1. Chaos. At precisely 10 p.m., a dozen of Silas's patrols were sent chasing ghosts. A clone, disguised as a clumsy dockworker, accidentally toppled a mountain of crates, creating a massive blockage on the main road. Another clone, disguised as a panicked merchant, screamed that Straw Hat Luffy was tearing up the tavern on the west side of town. A third and fourth clone started a brilliantly executed but entirely fake brawl in the market square. The Collectors Guild was stretched thin, racing from one manufactured crisis to another, their communications a mess of conflicting reports. While Silas was trying to sort through the noise, Phase 2 began. Nami, with the real Naruto acting as her shadow, moved toward the mansion. The grounds, which had been a death trap the night before, were now a playground. Naruto's sage mode allowed him to sense the guards long before they could be seen, their life forces like little flames in the dark. He guided Nami through the blind spots she had mapped, disarming the traps he could sense with shinobi precision. They moved as one, a seamless fusion of strategy and supernatural skill. They reached the treasury door, a massive vault of steel and gears. This is the hard part, Nami whispered. It's a combination lock with a 7-digit sequence. It'll take me at least 10 minutes to crack. Don't have 10 minutes, Naruto said, pressing his ear to the cold steel. Silas is on his way back. He's not falling for the diversions anymore. He closed his eyes, his fingers tracing the front of the vault. He's about 5 minutes out. Then we're trapped. No, we're not. Naruto's hand stopped. He held up his other hand, a small, quiet Rasengan spinning in his palm. It wasn't the monstrous, destructive sphere he'd used on the Sea King. This one was no bigger than an apple, controlled, precise. The tumblers, they give off a tiny vibration when they're aligned. He placed the miniature Rasengan against the vault door. He wasn't trying to break through it. He was using the high-frequency rotation to vibrate the entire mechanism. Click, 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 click. Got it. He spun the dial with impossible speed, and the massive vault door swung open with a soft sigh. Nami stared, her jaw slack. You picked the lock with that thing. It's a good multi-tool, he grinned. The room was filled to the ceiling with gold, jewels, and stacks of belly. It was the treasure of an entire island. But their moment of triumph was short-lived. The vault door slammed shut behind them, and the room was plunged into darkness, save for the emergency lights that cast long, ominous shadows. Silas stood in a secondary entrance they hadn't known about, his silver hair seeming to glow. He wasn't angry. He looked impressed. A brilliant feint, he said, his voice echoing in the chamber. You used chaos as a smokescreen to hide a precision strike. Very well done. But you underestimated me a second time. I don't just plan for my opponent's actions, I plan for their success. He held up a small, black remote. This vault is now sealed. The walls are lined with sea prism stone, and the air will run out in about 30 minutes. Checkmate. Nami's blood ran cold. He had played them perfectly. Naruto, however, just looked annoyed. You talk too much. He vanished. One moment he was standing beside Nami. The next he was in front of Silas, his fist cocked back. Silas was fast, his blade already moving to intercept, but Naruto was faster. He didn't punch. He flicked Silas's wrist, sending the remote clattering to the floor. He spun, his leg sweeping Silas's feet out from under him. As the bounty hunter fell, Naruto caught him, spun him around, and slammed him face first into the wall, holding him there. The entire exchange took less than a second. It wasn't a fight, it was a removal. Nami, the remote, he said, his voice calm. She scrambled to pick it up and hit the button. The vault door hissed open. Take him, Naruto said to the stunned guards who had just arrived with Silas. The governor is next. The rest was a blur. They loaded the treasure into a massive bag of holding that Usopp had ingeniously created. The Straw Hats, alerted by a signal flare, arrived to help. Their combined force making short work of the remaining guild members. The people of Port Felicity, seeing their oppressors defeated, rose up, storming the mansion and dragging the sputtering Governor Rodrigo out into the streets. Later that night, the island was transformed. A massive festival raged in the town square. The stolen money had been returned, every last belly. The Straw Hats were being hailed as heroes, Luffy eating an entire roasted pig, Zoro engaging in a drinking contest, Sanji swooning over the grateful women. Nami found Naruto sitting on the Sunny's figurehead, away from the noise. Watching the celebration, she climbed up and sat beside him. For a long time, they were silent, the sounds of music and laughter washing over them. Thank you, she said finally, her voice soft. It was your plan, he replied, not looking at her. I was just the muscle. No, she insisted, turning to face him. You were more than that. I have to ask. Why didn't you just do that from the start? You could have flown up to the mansion, blasted a hole in the wall, and been done in 5 minutes. Naruto finally met her gaze, his blue eyes holding a surprising depth. That would have been my plan, he admitted with a wry smile. But it wasn't as good as yours. You didn't just want to beat them. You wanted to give these people back their money, their pride. Smashing things just breaks them more. You wanted to heal them. He shrugged, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. A comfortable silence fell between them again. You knew what you were doing, he said, his voice gentle. I just made sure you were safe while you did it. Nami's breath caught in her throat. He wasn't looking at her like she was a fragile girl who needed protecting, or a greedy thief. Or even just a skilled navigator. He was looking at her like an equal, a commander whose orders he trusted implicitly. He hadn't just helped her, he had empowered her. He had seen her for her mind, for her strategy, for the very skills she valued most in herself. A warmth spread through her chest, a feeling entirely separate from the thrill of a successful heist or the glitter of gold. It was new, and it was nice. A small, genuine smile touched her lips as she looked out at the celebrating town, at the home she had helped save. For the first time, the terrifying, world-breaking power Naruto wielded didn't seem like a shadow. It felt like a shield. Chapter 2 End. Chapter 3. The Sage and the Archaeologist. In the days that followed the liberation of Port Felicity, a new dynamic settled over the Thousand Sunny. Naruto's place among the crew was no longer that of a strange, powerful guest, but of a trusted, if still bewildering, friend. The awe his power inspired was slowly being replaced by a comfortable familiarity. He was the guy who could create 1,000 versions of himself to swab the decks in 5 minutes, the guy who could spar with Zoro and Luffy simultaneously until the lawn was a cratered mess. And the guy who would listen to Usopp's tallest tales with wide-eyed, genuine belief. While the rest of the crew embraced the chaos, Nico Robin watched. From her usual seat on the upper deck, her book often lay forgotten in her lap as her dark, knowing eyes followed the blonde shinobi. Her interest was no longer just academic, it was personal. He was a living paradox. A man who wielded the power to erase islands but used it with the care of a surgeon. He was a poneglyph brought to life, a story from an unknown history walking their decks. She had spent her life chasing ghosts and whispers from the past, and now, a piece of an impossible past was eating ramen in their kitchen. Naruto, in turn, was fascinated by her. She was the calm center of the Straw Hat Hurricane. While everyone else was shouting, running, or exploding, Robin was still, her presence a pool of quiet depth. He could feel the shape of her spirit through his sage abilities, the ancient, weathered sorrow that formed her foundation, but also the resilient, sharp intelligence that shone over it. She was, in many ways, the opposite of him, yet he felt a strange kinship with her stillness. He was often training on the bow, trying to better understand the natural energy of this world. It was different from the energy of the elemental nations. It was wilder, deeper, and tasted of salt and endless horizons. It felt ancient, and it responded to his call with a sluggish, almost curious reluctance. He was relearning a fundamental part of himself, and it was a humbling, isolating process. Their paths converged on a morning shrouded in mist. It wasn't a natural sea fog that rolled in and burned off with the sun. This was a thick, pearlescent blanket that clung to the ship, muffling sound and swallowing the horizon. It felt wrong, and Nami's log pose was spinning erratically, useless. "This is no ordinary weather pattern," she announced, her brow furrowed in frustration. "The magnetic fields are all over the place. We're sailing blind." It was then that they saw it. A dark shape looming in the gray, an island that seemed to drink the light. It wasn't on any of Nami's charts. It was a place that, by all rights, shouldn't exist. Jagged, black rocks formed its coastline, and twisted, leafless trees clawed at the misty sky. It was a place steeped in silence and secrets. Most of the crew felt a primal urge to steer clear. But 2 of them were utterly captivated. An uncharted island, hidden by a magnetic anomaly and a perpetual fog, Robin murmured, her book finally closed and set aside. Her eyes shone with an intensity the crew rarely saw. The hallmarks of a place the world has tried to forget. "I must go ashore." Luffy, smelling an adventure of the highest order, immediately agreed. "Yosh, let's go explore the spooky ghost island." As the crew prepared the shark submerge for a shore party, Naruto approached Robin. "I'll go with you." She looked at him, a quizzical tilt to her head. "The captain will surely lead the expedition. Luffy will charge in and smash things," Naruto said with an affectionate smile. "That's what he does. But a place like this," he closed his eyes for a moment, letting the unnatural energy of the island wash over him. It felt like a genjutsu, a subtle illusion woven into the very fabric of the place. "It feels like it needs a softer touch. Besides," he opened his eyes, the orange pigment of sage mode bleeding around them for a split second. "In a mist like this, you'll need a better guide than a log pose." Robin's lips curved into a genuine smile. She understood. He wasn't offering his strength. He was offering his senses. He had recognized the nature of the island's defenses in a way no one else could. "An astute observation, Shinobi-san. Your company would be most welcome. They took one of the smaller boats, the Mini Mary, leaving the larger party to Luffy. As they rowed toward the black shore, the mist enveloped them completely. The Sunny vanished behind them, and the world shrank to just the two of them in a small boat on a silent, gray sea. Yet, neither felt lost. Naruto navigated by a sense beyond sight, feeling the thrum of the island's life force, a weak and ancient pulse that called to him. They landed on a beach of black sand. The air was heavy, still, and cold. Before them, rising out of the mist, were the ruins of a city. The architecture was unlike anything Robin had ever seen, graceful, soaring arches and delicate spires that seemed to defy gravity, all carved from a stone that absorbed the light. It was a place of profound beauty and profound sorrow. Incredible, Robin breathed, her gloved hand tracing the edge of a collapsed wall. This style, it predates anything I know of the ancient kingdoms. This could be, she trailed off, her voice filled with a reverence that bordered on fear. Watch your step, Naruto warned, his hand gently touching her arm. He pointed to the ground. Sari, of flagstones in the path ahead glowed with a faint, almost invisible energy that only he could perceive. Pressure plates. They're not connected to anything physical. They're linked to the energy of the island. He guided her around the trap, his senses on high alert. The entire city was a defensive mechanism. Not a fortress built to repel armies, but a library designed to protect itself from the unworthy. As they ventured deeper, the traps became more sophisticated. A hallway where the walls projected illusions of bottomless pits. Guardian statues in the shape of stylized sea creatures, their stone eyes following them. A courtyard where the air itself seemed to twist, trying to turn them around and led them back the way they came. For every trap, Naruto had a counter. He didn't smash the statues, he found the small, glowing energy source within them and gently disrupted its flow with a precise pulse of his own chakra, putting them back to sleep. He didn't dispel the illusions, he described their nature to Robin. Explaining how the energy was being bent to trick the eye, allowing them to walk through them unharmed. They worked in perfect sync. Her encyclopedic knowledge of ancient cultures allowed her to predict the purpose of a room or the likely placement of a trap, while his sage mode allowed him to see the mechanism. It was a dance of intellect and instinct, and with every puzzle they solved, the quiet respect between them grew. The creators of this place weren't trying to kill intruders, Robin mused, as Naruto pointed out a false wall that hummed with hypnotic energy. They were trying to confuse and deter them. They were protecting knowledge, not treasure. Seems like a lot of trouble to go through for a bunch of old stories, Naruto commented, though his tone was curious, not dismissive. To some, old stories are the most dangerous things in the world, she replied, her voice soft and heavy with meaning. It was then they heard voices. Harsh, prophesio, null voices that were utterly out of place in the ancient silence. Peeking from behind a collapsed pillar, they saw a group of figures in dark, immaculate suits. They moved with the clipped, deadly efficiency of government agents. Robin's blood ran cold. Cipher Pole. Leading them was a man with a ridiculously long, square nose and a smug expression. He was arguing with another man, a frail, older academic who clutched a historical tome to his chest. Agent Kaku, I must insist on a more thorough cataloging before the sanitization process begins, the scholar pleaded. Kaku, of the now disbanded CP9 but clearly still in government employ, scoffed. Your orders, Professor, were to identify the primary information source and report its contents. My orders are to ensure this location and its forbidden history are erased from the map. The 5 elders are most insistent on maintaining the narrative. Now, find what you're looking for, so we can get on with the fireworks. The word, erased, struck Robin like a physical blow. Her mind flashed back to Ohara, to the flames, the screams, the sight of the Buster Call ships on the horizon, all there to sanitize, a history the world wasn't meant to know. Her breath hitched, and for a moment, the serene archaeologist was gone, replaced by a terrified 8-year-old girl hiding in the smoke. Naruto felt the spike of her distress, a sharp, cold stab in the ambient energy. He put a steadying hand on her shoulder, his presence a warm, solid anchor in her sea of traumatic memory. She looked at him, her composure cracking, her eyes wide with a fear he had never seen in them. He didn't speak. He just gave a small, firm nod. I'm here. We'll handle this. They followed the cipher pole unit silently, shadowing them through the ruins until they reached the city's heart, a massive, circular chamber, open to the misty sky, and in its center, standing monolithic and silent, was a poneglyph. The professor rushed toward it, his hands trembling with academic fervor. Kaku and his agents secured the perimeter, their stances casual but ready. This is it, the professor cried. The language is archaic, but I can decipher it. It speaks of the void century. Excellent, Kaku said with a bored sigh. Read it, record it, and then we'll blow this entire cursed island back to the bedrock it came from. That was the breaking point. Robin stepped out from behind the pillar. Her expression a mask of cold fury. You will do no such thing. Kaku turned, surprised. His eyes widened slightly in recognition. Nico Robin, the devil child of Ohara. I should have known a place like this would draw you out like a moth to a flame. It seems we get to clean up 2 historical loose ends today. He grinned, cracking his knuckles. Men, secure the poneglyph. I'll deal with the woman. Before his agents could take a single step, Naruto appeared in the center of the room, standing between them and Robin. He hadn't moved with blinding speed, he had just arrived. Kaku's eyes narrowed. And who is this? Her bodyguard, Naruto said simply. Kaku laughed. You think one man can stop the world government's finest? I mastered the 6 powers before you were out of diapers, boy. In a flicker of Soru, he vanished, reappearing directly in front of Naruto, his finger extended for a Shigen, a bullet-like jab aimed at Naruto's throat. The attack never landed. Naruto's head tilted a fraction of an inch, the deadly finger gliding harmlessly past his ear. Kaku's eyes widened in shock at the casual, almost lazy evasion. He tried to follow up with a Rankyaku, a blade of compressed air from his kick. But Naruto's hand was already there, catching his ankle in an unbreakable grip. Too slow, Naruto said, his voice level. He tossed Kaku aside as if he were a child's doll. The other agents moved, a blur of Geppo leaps and Soru dashes. But it was useless. A dozen shadow clones popped into existence, each one a master of taijutsu. The clones didn't even seem to be trying. They intercepted the elite agents, redirecting their attacks, tripping them, and tying them up in knots with their own limbs. It wasn't a fight, it was a lecture in martial arts, and the cipher pole were the failing students. Kaku, enraged, shot into the air with Geppo. You cannot fight what you cannot predict. My tempest kick is unavoidable. He began to spin, unleashing a storm of raw Nk-Yaku blades that shredded the stone floor. The real Naruto looked up, unimpressed. He created a single clone, which then propelled the original upwards with a powerful shove. Naruto sailed into the air, weaving through the storm of air blades with impossible grace. He appeared above the spinning agent. My turn, he said. He didn't use a Rasengan or any grand technique. He simply tapped Kaku on the back of the head with 2 fingers. The agent's eyes rolled up, and his whirlwind attack ceased. He dropped from the sky like a stone, caught neatly by one of the clones on the ground. Within 30 seconds, the entire elite unit was neutralized, unconscious but unharmed, stacked in a neat pile by the chamber entrance. The old professor stared, his jaw agape, his worldview shattered. Naruto wall. Ked over and gently took the historical tome from his numb fingers. I think your research trip is over, he said, his voice without malice. With the threat gone, the silence of the ancient city returned. Robin walked toward the poneglyph as if in a trance. The carved characters seemed to call to her. Her gloved fingers traced the lines, her lips moving silently as she translated the forgotten language. Naruto stood guard, giving her space, but he could feel the emotional storm brewing within her. The poneglyph wasn't just stone and words to her, it was a testament to her mother's sacrifice, to her people's legacy. After a long time, she turned to him, her face pale, her composure gone. It has happened before, she whispered, her voice trembling. Someone like you has been to this world before. She explained what the text said. Fragmented as it was, it told of a time during the Void Century when a visitor from a land of spinning heavens appeared. This visitor wielded a Sun Li K energy, and was a force of great change, befriending the ancient kingdom and fighting alongside them. But his very presence was a disruption. The text spoke of the Wardens of Order, a coalition of 20 kingdoms who rose to power. Not just to defeat the ancient kingdom, but to correct the narrative, to erase the visitor and the chaos he represented from history itself. The weight of the discovery, combined with the fresh trauma of the Cipher Pole's arrival, was too much. Robin's strong facade crumbled. Tears she had held back for 20 years finally fell. "They destroyed my home for this," she choked out. Her hand pressed against the cold stone of the poneglyph. "My family, my teachers, everyone. All because they dared to believe that history belongs to everyone, not just those in power. I've been alone for so long. Naruto-san, the only person in the world who carries this burden, this crime of knowledge." Naruto listened, his expression uncharacteristically somber. When she finished, he didn't offer empty words of comfort. He didn't say it would be okay. Instead, he walked over and sat on a fallen pillar across from her. "I get it," he said quietly. She looked up, her tear-filled eyes questioning. "The loneliness," he clarified. "Feeling like you're a monster. A weapon. Something to be feared and controlled." He looked at his own hands. "Before I was born, my village was attacked by a giant monster. The nine-tailed fox, the leader of my village, the fourth Hokage, had to seal it away to save everyone. He sealed it inside a newborn baby. Me." He told her everything. About the glares from the villagers. The whispers that followed him down the street, the crushing solitude of a childhood where every adult saw him as a demon and every child was forbidden from playing with him. He spoke of the burden of carrying a catastrophic power he never asked for, a power that made him a target for the entire world. "For a long time," he finished, his voice raw with memory, "I felt like the most alone person in the world. Cursed. It's a heavy thing to carry, a destiny you didn't choose." Robin stared at him, her tears forgotten. His story was not the same as hers, but the feeling, the deep, soul-crushing weight of being isolated by the very thing that made you who you are, that was a language they both understood perfectly. He wasn't just a powerful ally. He was a kindred spirit, a fellow survivor of a lonely fate. In the silence of that forgotten chamber, surrounded by the echoes of a history the world had tried to bury, two of its loneliest souls found a common ground. The bond forged between them was not one of romance or even simple friendship. It was deeper. It was the profound, unspoken understanding of two people who had looked into the abyss and had finally found someone else looking back. They returned to the sunny as the mist began to recede, leaving the unconscious Cipher Pole agents and the terrified professor to be found by their own. Robin was quiet, but it was a different kind of quiet. Not the stillness of solitude, but the calm of shared understanding. When she looked at Naruto now, she saw not just a key to the past, but a comrade who understood the true weight of its pages. He had protected her history, and in doing so, had shown her that she no longer had to carry its burden alone. Chapter 3 End. Chapter 4. The First Arbiter. The revelation from the Forgotten Island settled over the Thousand Sunny like a persistent fog. It wasn't the tangible, view-swallowing mist they had escaped, but a haze of unease and unanswered questions. Robin, usually so reserved, became the center of their strategic discussions. In the ship's library, with Nami's charts spread beside ancient texts, she explained her findings. The Wardens of Order, a coalition that had existed since the Void Century, dedicated to correcting the narrative. "They're not Marines, and they're not Cipher Pole," Robin explained, her voice low and serious. "They're something older, a hidden pillar of the world government, tasked with eliminating threats to the world's fundamental stability. Threats like the ancient kingdom, and apparently, visitors from other worlds." Nami traced a line on a map, her brow furrowed. "So, they're fanatics. They're not after us for our bounties. They're on a holy mission to erase Naruto." The thought sent a chill down her spine. This was worse than any emperor or admiral. How do you fight an enemy who believes they are saving the world from you? Naruto, for his part, felt the weight of it all settle on his shoulders. The poneglyph wasn't just a history lesson. It felt like a wanted poster with his name on it. He was the anomaly, the disruption, the coming cataclysm. He had spent his entire life fighting to be acknowledged, to be seen as Naruto Uzumaki, not the nine-tailed fox. Now, in a new world, he had been given a new, even more terrifying label. He found himself spending more time at the bow of the ship, staring out at the endless blue. A maelstrom of thoughts churning within him. He was putting his new friends, his new family, in the crosshairs of an ancient, fanatical enemy. The thought was a familiar, bitter poison. The attack came without warning, in the middle of a calm, sun-drenched afternoon. One moment, the Sunny was slicing through the waves with its usual cheerful gait, the next, it wasn't. The water around them changed, its texture shifting from liquid to something thick and viscous, like clear honey. The ship's momentum died, its forward progress slowing to a near imperceptible crawl. The waves flattened, the wind died, and a profound, unnatural stillness descended. "What's going on?" Usopp cried, peering over the railing. "Did we get caught in some kind of sap stream?" "No," Frankie yelled from the helm. "Wrestling with the wheel. The rudder's not responding, but the engine is running at full power. It's like the ocean itself is grabbing us." It was then they saw her. A figure, walking toward them from the horizon. She moved with an unhurried, serene grace, her feet seeming to press down on the surface of the water as if it were solid ground. She was a woman of ethereal beauty, with long, silver hair that floated around her as if weightless. She was dressed in an immaculate white and gold uniform, an attire that bore no insignia of the Marines or the world government, yet radiated an ancient and unyielding authority. She stopped 100 feet from the ship, her calm, violet eyes sweeping over the crew before finally coming to rest on Naruto. Her expression was not one of hatred or aggression. It was one of profound, almost sorrowful pity. "The anomaly," she said, her voice carrying across the still water, clear as a bell. "I had hoped the readings were a mistake." Zoro's hand was already on his swords. "Who the hell are you?" "I am Arbiter Serafina," she replied, her gaze never leaving Naruto. "I serve the Grand Warden and the immutable concept of order. My purpose here is to correct a tear in the fabric of this reality. I am here for him." Luffy, who had been watching with a curious frown, stepped to the railing, his straw hat shadowing his eyes. "Naruto is my crewmate. No one's correcting him. And no one tells my Nakama he doesn't belong here." He pulled his arm back, his muscles coiling. "Gum gum, Captain." "Wait," Robin called out, recognizing the calm fanaticism in the Arbiter's eyes. It was the same look the Buster Call admirals had worn. But it was too late. "Pistol." Luffy's fist shot forward, a rubbery cannonball blurring across the distance. But as it flew, a strange thing happened. It began to slow down. The blur resolved into a clear image of his fist, which then became a sluggishly crawling projectile, finally stopping dead in the air. Trembling with contained force, just inches from Serafina's impassive face. It was as if it had hit an invisible wall of molasses. Luffy's eyes went wide. "What the?" He tried to retract his arm, but it was just as slow. Straining against an unseen force. "Chaos is the enemy of order," Serafina stated calmly. "And motion is the engine of chaos. It must be stilled." Zoro didn't waste time with questions. He drew two of his swords. 36-pound Phoenix. He unleashed a spiraling slash of compressed air. Like Luffy's punch, the attack started with blinding speed, only to decelerate rapidly. The blade of wind losing its edge and finally dissipating into a gentle breeze a dozen feet from its target. From the upper deck, Sanji shot into the air with Skywalk, his leg wreathed in the flames of Diablo Hambi. "Don't get cocky, you damn witch," he dove, aiming a devastating kick at her head. But his descent became a crawl, the flames flickering and dying. He felt an immense weight press down on him, his own momentum becoming a prison. With a frustrated groan, he dropped heavily back onto the Sunny's deck, his limbs feeling like they were carved from lead. The crew stared, a cold dread seeping in. Their strongest fighters, their fastest attacks, were all useless. "It is a devil fruit," Robin analyzed, her mind racing. "She's creating a zone of influence around herself. One that seems to negate kinetic energy." "Precisely," Serafina said, a hint of approval in her voice. "The Shizuka no mi. The still fruit. Within my domain, I am the master of inertia. I can steal the motion from any object, any person. The more you struggle, the more kinetic energy you generate, and the more power I have to take from you, rendering you utterly immobile. Your very strength becomes your cage." She raised a hand toward Naruto. Her serene expression was the most terrifying thing they had ever seen. Your energy is a maelstrom of chaos, anomaly. It is foreign, violent, and disruptive. But it, too, will be stilled. Naruto felt it then, a crushing pressure on his very being. It wasn't just his body, it felt like the Arbiter's power was reaching inside him, trying to calm the raging furnace of his chakra, to suppress the very vibration of his life force. This was a conceptual power, a direct counter to everything he was. Brute force was a liability. He had to be smarter. He formed the hand signs, gathering chakra. Wind style. Rasenshuriken. A miniature, shrieking hurricane formed in his hand. He poured an immense amount of power into it, hoping to overwhelm her ability through sheer destructive force. He hurled it. The spinning shuriken of wind screamed through the air, tearing a gouge in the syrupy sea beneath it. But like all the other attacks, it slowed. The high-pitched shriek died down to a low hum, then a whisper, and then silence. The Rasenshuriken, one of his most powerful techniques, wobbled in the air a few feet from the Arbiter and then fizzled out of existence. Its rotational energy stolen and unmade. This was bad. He was the primary target, and her power was intensifying around him. He could feel his movements becoming sluggish, his thoughts clouded by the oppressive stillness. He needed a new plan. He couldn't attack through her zone. So, he had to attack from outside it. Shadow Clone Jutsu. With a series of soft puffs, a dozen Narutos appeared all over the Thousand Sunny, in the crow's nest, on the lion's head, hanging from the rigging. Serafina's placid expression tightened a fraction. She calmly began to extend her power. The clones freezing one by one, their limbs locking up as their motion was stolen. But they were a perfect distraction. More than that, they were a diagnostic tool. As each clone froze, the real Naruto got a precise feel for the boundaries of her stillness zone. It was a perfect sphere, extending about 200 meters from her position. An idea, born of desperation and sage training, sparked in his mind. He dropped into a meditative pose, ignoring the sluggishness in his limbs. He closed his eyes and reached out, not with his own chakra, but with his senses. He felt the wild, untamed natural energy of the world around him, the endless power in the sky above, the deep, rolling energy of the ocean below. All of it was outside her sphere of influence. Serafina saw the orange pigment appear around his eyes. "More of your chaotic energy?" she asked, a note of disappointment in her voice. "It is useless. I am the embodiment of stillness. I am the end of all motion. You cannot win." Naruto didn't answer. He held up his right hand. On the far side of the ship, one of his clones on the railing, just at the edge of the stillness zone, mimicked the gesture. He began to gather natural energy. A feat of control he had never before attempted. He wasn't drawing it into his own body. He was channeling it, focusing it, shaping it into a point in the air just outside the boundary of Serafina's domain. A sphere of pure, volatile energy began to form, 20 feet above the water and 201 meters away from the Arbiter. It crackled and hissed, not with the controlled spin of chakra, but with the raw, untamed fury of nature itself. It was a sage art, Rasengan, created by proxy. Then, he did something even more unorthodox. Another clone, perched high on the main mast, created a thick strand of pure, flexible chakra, like a glistening whip. It shot out, wrapping around the unstable sphere of natural energy. With a unified roar, Naruto and all his clones pulled. The clone on the mast acted as an anchor, the chakra strand as a slingshot. The Rasengan of pure natural energy was flung forward, not as a projected jutsu, but as a physical object already moving at incredible velocity. It breached the stillness zone. Serafina's power instantly latched onto it, attempting to steal its kinetic and rotational energy as it had with everything else. But this was different. This wasn't just motion. This was the raw, conceptual power of the world itself. It was the energy of a hurricane, the force of a tidal wave, the fury of a lightning strike, all compressed into a single, unstable point. Trying to still that much pure, untamed energy was like trying to catch a tsunami in a teacup. The Arbiter's calm finally broke. Her eyes widened in shock and then terror. ROR as she felt her devil fruit ability being catastrophically overloaded. The sphere of stillness around her flickered violently, cracks of golden light spider webbing through the air. With a sound like a universe of shattering glass, her domain collapsed. The effect was instantaneous and brutal. All the kinetic energy she had stolen was released at once. Luffy's fist, which had been held in stasis for a full minute, completed its journey in a nanosecond, slamming into her jaw with the stored momentum of a freight train. Zoro's air slash and Sanji's fiery kick, also held in reserve, materialized from thin air and struck her from the sides. It was a perfectly coordinated three-pronged attack that she had no defense against, because from her perspective, it had already happened. The Arbiter was launched backward, skipping across the surface of the now normal sea like a stone before crashing into the waves and disappearing into a plume of white spray. The crew of the Sunny gasped for breath as the oppressive weight vanished. Feeling returning to their limbs, they stared at Naruto, who was breathing heavily, the sage mode receding from his eyes. He hadn't just overpowered her. He had dissected her ability, understood its rules, and then used those very rules to defeat her. It was a victory of strategy as much as power. Serafina surfaced, her immaculate uniform torn, her silver hair plastered to her face. She was bruised and bleeding, but alive. Her serenity was gone, replaced by a look of religious horror. She stared at Naruto, not as an enemy, but as an omen. You command the very energy of the world," she gasped, her voice trembling. "The prophecies of the Void Century were true. You are not a simple anomaly. You are the harbinger. You are the coming cataclysm." Before anyone could move to capture her, the water behind her began to churn. A vessel surfaced, sleek and white and utterly silent. It resembled no ship they had ever seen, moving without a wake, its hull crafted from a material that seemed to absorb the light. A hatch hissed open, and several figures in white and gold pulled the injured Arbiter inside. Without a sound, the strange submarine submerged, vanishing into the depths as if it had never been there at all. The Straw Hats were left alone on a suddenly mundane sea, the sun shining as if nothing had happened. They had won, but it was a victory that tasted of ash. They now knew the name of their enemy, the Wardens of Order, and had witnessed the terrifying, specific nature of their power. This wasn't a force you could simply punch. It was an idea, an ideology, with soldiers who could command the very laws of physics. Robin looked from the empty sea to Naruto, her mind connecting the Arbiter's final, terrified words to the text on the poneglyph. This was it. The conflict that had led to the Void Century, the war to correct the narrative, was beginning again. A silent, grim understanding passed between the crew as they all looked at their newest member. He was no longer just a powerful friend who had fallen into their lives. He was the eye of a storm that had been brewing for 800 years. And by asking him to join their crew, they had chosen to sail directly into it. His fight was now, irrevocably, their fight. Chapter 4 End. Chapter 5. A Captain's Decree, a Navigator's Compass, a Scholar's History. Victory was a cold, tasteless thing. The sun shone with its usual brilliant indifference, the sea was a placid blue, but the soul of the Thousand Sunny was in the doldrums. The crew's usual boisterous energy had been leached away, replaced by a heavy, thoughtful silence. The battle with Arbiter Serafina had lasted mere minutes, but it had fundamentally changed the nature of their journey. They had fought emperors, warlords, and fanatical marines. They had fought men who wanted to conquer, to destroy, to acquire. They had never fought an idea. The Wardens of Order didn't want to rule the world, they wanted to prune it. And Naruto was the branch they felt was growing in the wrong direction. He felt their gazes on him, even when they weren't looking. Zoro's, sharp and appraising as he polished his swords. Sanji's, a flicker of concern from the galley doorway. Usopp's, a nervous glance from the workshop. They weren't looks of accusation, but of a shared, grim reality settling in. He was the eye of the storm, and they were the ship that had chosen to sail into it. The guilt was a familiar weight in his gut. It was the same feeling he'd had as a child, when the villagers' whispers followed him like his own shadow. It was the feeling that his very existence was a magnet for trouble, a danger to those he cared about. So he did the only thing he knew how to do, he trained. From sunup to sundown, the grassy deck of the Sunny became his dojo. He pushed himself with a relentless ferocity that made even Zoro's monstrous regimen look like a light warm-up. He practiced his control over this world's natural energy, wrestling with its wild, oceanic power. He created hundreds of shadow clones and engaged them in massive, swirling brawls, the thuds of impact and the sharp poof of dispersing clones a constant, jarring percussion against the ship's quiet progress. He was trying to build a wall of his own power, high enough to protect his new friends from the consequences of his presence. But in doing so, he was building a wall around himself. Nami watched him from the helm, her hands gripping the railing so tightly her knuckles were white. Every explosive poof of a disappearing clone made her flinch. She saw his relentless training not as preparation, but as a declaration of intent. This is my fight. I'll handle it alone. It was noble, it was brave, and it was the stupidest thing she had ever seen. It terrified her. Her fear was a cold, sharp thing, a shard of ice in her chest. It wasn't the screaming panic of facing a monster, it was the quiet, gnawing dread of helplessness. Serafina's power was absolute, a negation of the very laws of combat as they knew them. How do you navigate a sea with no wind? How do you fight an enemy who can command stillness itself? Her maps were useless, her knowledge of weather patterns irrelevant. She was a navigator with no chart for the storm they were sailing into, and it made her feel small and powerless in a way she hadn't since Arlong Park. She found herself poring over her maps, trying to chart a course through the most remote, uninhabited waters, a futile attempt to hide a man who shone like a sun from an enemy who could sense the light. Robin watched him, too. But her perspective was different. She sat in her lounge chair, a book open but unread on her lap. When she looked at Naruto, she saw the visitor from a land of spinning heavens, from the poneglyph. She saw a historical cycle repeating itself, a war of ideology being rekindled. Her fear was not of the immediate danger, but of the crushing weight of that history. She knew what it meant to be hunted not for your actions, but for your existence. She saw Naruto isolating himself, trying to bear a burden that had crushed kingdoms, and her heart ached with a profound, empathetic sorrow. She retreated to the library, not to hide, but to fight. She spread her notes from the hidden island across the table, cross-referencing them with every scrap of forbidden history she had accumulated. Her battle was one of knowledge. If the wardens were an idea, then she would find the counter-argument. The breaking point came on the third day. Naruto was in the middle of a frantic sparring session with 200 clones, the deck a chaotic blur of orange and black. He was pushing his sage mode to its limits, trying to maintain the form for hours instead of minutes. He was exhausted, his movements becoming sloppy. But he refused to stop. Nami couldn't take it anymore. She stormed down from the helm, her face a mask of furious concern. "Stop it," she yelled, her voice cutting through the din of the mock battle. "Just stop it, Naruto." He paused, breathing heavily, and dismissed the clones in a cascade of smoke. "Nami, what's wrong? What's wrong?" she repeated, her voice incredulous. She gestured wildly at the empty deck, at him. "This is what's wrong. You, running yourself into the ground like a single-minded idiot. What do you think you're accomplishing?" "I have to get stronger," he said, his voice a low growl of frustration. "That woman, Serafina, she could have killed us all. Her power, it was something else. If I can't beat people like her, then you'll all be," he couldn't finish the sentence. "We'll all be what? In danger." Nami's laugh was harsh and humorless. "We're pirates, Naruto. We've been in danger since the day we set sail. Did you think we were on a pleasure cruise? This is what we do. But we do it together." She stepped closer, poking a finger hard into his chest. "This isn't your burden to carry alone. This isn't the Hidden Leaf Village, and you're not its lonely protector. You're a straw hat pirate now. Your problem is our problem. But you're so busy trying to be a one-man army, you're forgetting the most important part of being in a crew." The raw, unfiltered emotion of her outburst stunned him into silence. The rest of the crew had gathered, drawn by the shouting. Zoro leaned against the mast, arms crossed, his expression unreadable. Sanji stood by the galley door, his cigarette unlit. Frankie, Usopp, and Chopper watched with wide, worried eyes. Before Naruto could formulate a response, a calm, simple voice cut through the tension. "She's right, you know." Luffy walked forward, his sandals slapping softly on the deck. He wasn't smiling. He stopped in front of Naruto and looked him square in the eye. That weird lady was strong, Luffy said. His voice devoid of its usual goofy cheer. It was the voice of a captain. And the next one will probably be strong, too. So you should get stronger. We all should. He paused, his gaze sweeping over his entire crew. But Nami's right, you're one of us now. When I asked you to join, it wasn't because you were strong. It was because you seemed like a good guy. He jabbed a thumb at his own chest. This is my crew. You're my friend. That means your enemy is my enemy. If those, Warden, people want you, they have to come through me. And through Zoro, and Sanji, and Usopp, and Nami, and Chopper, and Robin, and Frankie, and Jinbei. His voice rose with each name, a simple, powerful declaration of fact. We're the Straw Hat Pirates. We don't abandon our friends. We don't let them fight alone. End of story. The silence that followed was absolute. Luffy's words were not a complex strategic plan or a rousing speech. They were a statement of unshakable truth, the core principle upon which their entire world was built. He had taken Naruto's guilt, Nami's fear, and the entire crew's uncertainty and swept it all away with a simple, powerful current of loyalty. A slow grin spread across Zoro's face. Hey, Captain's orders. Sanji finally lit his cigarette. Guess we'll just have to kick their asses, then. A whole new organization of bad guys to cook for, what a pain. The tension didn't just break. It evaporated. The weight on Naruto's shoulders didn't vanish, but for the first time, he felt others step up to help him bear it. He looked at Luffy, at the unwavering trust in his captain's eyes, and felt a lump form in his throat. He had spent a lifetime fighting for this kind of acceptance. Here, it was given freely, as a matter of course. He managed a weak, watery grin. You guys. That night, the ship was alive again. Sanji cooked a feast, Luffy ate for 10, and Usopp told a wildly exaggerated tale of how he had single-handedly distracted Serafina with his dashing good looks. The storm had passed, leaving a stronger foundation in its wake. Later, when the party had wound down, Naruto found Nami in the map room. She was bent over a chart, the soft light of her lamp illuminating the worried lines on her brow. He leaned against the doorframe. Hey, she looked up, a hint of a blush on her cheeks. Hey, sorry about, yelling. Don't be, he said, walking over to the table. You were right, I was being an idiot. He looked at the maps, at the intricate, beautiful lines she had drawn. I'm just not used to this. To people wanting to stand with me when things get dangerous. She put her pencil down and looked at him, her expression soft and vulnerable. We're not just people, Naruto. We're your crew, your family. Her voice faltered on the last word, heavy with a meaning she rarely let surface. A faint shimmer of tears welled in her eyes, born of the fear she'd been holding back all day. I was just so scared. Seeing you fight like that. Seeing that woman's power. It felt like Arlong all over again. An enemy we couldn't beat, and someone I cared about standing right in their path. I don't want to lose anyone else. The confession hung in the air, raw and honest. He saw past the brilliant navigator, past the cunning thief, and saw the orphan girl who had fought tooth and nail to protect her home. Without thinking, he reached out and gently placed his hand over hers on the map table. Her hand was trembling slightly. You won't, he said, his voice a low, steady promise. I'm not going anywhere, and I'm not going to fight alone anymore. The warmth of his hand, the simple sincerity in his eyes, was all it took. A single tear escaped and traced a path down her cheek. She didn't pull her hand away. In the quiet intimacy of the map room, surrounded by the charts of the world she so desperately wanted to draw, a new, uncharted territory of the heart was being discovered. An hour later, seeking the quiet solitude of the library, he found Robin. She was surrounded by books and sheets of parchment, her brow furrowed in the same intense concentration he had seen on Nami, but hers was a battle of lore, not logistics. She looked up as he entered, her usual placid smile returning, though it seemed a little warmer than before. Shinobi-san, I trust you are feeling more a part of the whole now. He rubbed the back of his neck, a little embarrassed. Yeah, Luffy has a way of making things simple. He walked over to the table, his eyes scanning the strange symbols and notes she had copied from the poneglyph. Find anything. A potential pattern, she said, her voice regaining its scholarly excitement. She pointed to a series of glyphs. The poneglyph on the Misty Island and a fragment I translated from Alabasta both mention the wardens in relation to astronomical events. Specifically, the appearance of wandering stars. It seems their mandate isn't just to police history, but to police reality itself. They believe anomalies, like you, are the precursors to a celestial imbalance, a cosmic illness. He listened, fascinated. Nami saw the world in currents and isobars. Robin saw it in epics and ideologies. They were two sides of a brilliant coin, and he was beginning to see how much he needed both. They weren't just arguing or analyzing. They were arming him, each in their own way. Nami with her pragmatic strategy. Robin with her deep, historical insight. So they're not just fanatics, he mused, looking at the glyphs. They're cosmic doctors who think I'm the plague. Aptly put, she said with a small smile. And it gives us a potential weakness. Their entire philosophy is based on a prophecy, a belief system. An idea, and ideas, unlike men, can be broken with the truth. He looked at her, at the fierce, unyielding light in her eyes. It was the look of a scholar going to war. He understood then that her fight for the true history and his fight for his own existence were now one and the same. She wasn't just helping him, he was the living proof her entire life's struggle was real and just. He pulled up a chair and sat down beside her, their shoulders almost touching as they bent over the ancient texts. Okay, Archaeologist San, he said, his voice filled with a newfound resolve. Let's break their idea. Under the watchful eyes of the lion figurehead, the Thousand Sunny sailed on. The threat looming on the horizon was larger and more terrifying than anything they had ever faced. But inside the ship, a lonely shinobi, a fearful navigator, and a burdened scholar had found their anchors in the storm. Naruto Uzumaki was no longer just a passenger. He was home, and for the first time since he'd arrived in this world, his heart, a maelstrom of power and pain, felt the promise of a calm harbor. Chapter 5 End. Chapter 6. The Grand Warden's Gambit. The log pose, for the first time in weeks, pointed with unwavering certainty. Ahead of them lay Aegis Port, a sprawling island metropolis that served as the G5 Marine Branch headquarters and the last major bastion of world government control before the chaotic currents of the New World. It was a place of legendary order, a fortress of civilization against the untamed sea. For the Straw Hats, it was a necessary, if dangerous, stop for crucial supplies. For Naruto, it was his first glimpse into the heart of the power that ruled this world. As the Thousand Sunny sailed into the magnificent natural harbor, the crew was struck by an unnerving sense of perfection. The city was a masterpiece of engineering, its white towers gleaming in the sun. Its streets laid out in a flawless grid. There was no litter, no graffiti, no clamor of a bustling port. The ships in the harbor were moored with geometric precision. The dockworkers moved with a synchronized, efficient rhythm, their faces calm and placid. This is clean, Usopp said, his voice a nervous whisper, as if a loud noise might get him arrested. It is more than clean. It is sterile, Robin observed from the railing, her eyes narrowed. A living city should have a more chaotic pulse. This place feels preserved. Nami was uneasy. The marine presence is overwhelming. But they're not even looking at us. It's like they don't care that a pirate ship with 100 million belly bounty captain just sailed into their main harbor. Her unease was justified. As they disembarked, they were met not by a platoon of armed soldiers, but by a single man in the crisp white and gold uniform of a high-ranking official. He was older, with silver hair tied back in a neat tail and a face that seemed permanently etched with a paternalistic, gentle smile. He radiated an aura of calm, benevolent authority. Straw Hat Pirates, the man said, his voice smooth and welcoming. I am Grand Warden Tiberius, acting administrator of Aegis Port. Welcome. We have been expecting you. The name sent a jolt through Naruto and Robin. Grand Warden. This was him, the leader of the Wardens of Order. He wasn't some shadowy figure hiding in Mary Geoise. He was here, in the open, greeting them with a smile. Before Luffy could say something predictably provocative, Tiberius continued. We are aware of the unfortunate misunderstanding with Arbiter Serafina. A regrettable, but necessary, field test. Please, consider Aegis Port a sanctuary. A place to rest and resupply before you continue your journey. You are our esteemed guests. The offer was so disarmingly polite, so utterly contrary to their expectations, that it left them speechless. Tiberius gestured toward the city. Enjoy our hospitality. Witness for yourselves what a society built on the principles of true, benevolent order can achieve. With another serene smile, he turned and walked away, melting back into the placid populace. It's a trap, Nami stated flatly. Obviously, Zoro grunted, his hand resting on his swords. Luffy just grinned. A trap with food, let's go. As they ventured into the city, the unnerving perfection continued. People strolled along pristine avenues, their conversations quiet and polite. There were no children shouting, no merchants haggling, no lovers quarreling in the street. When a vendor sold a piece of fruit, the exact change was exchanged without a word, the transaction seamless and devoid of any human interaction. It was a society running with the flawless, soulless precision of a clockwork machine. They soon discovered the source of this oppressive tranquility. In the central plaza, a massive amphitheater had been erected. From a high balcony, Grand Warden T. Iberius was addressing the thousands of citizens gathered below. His voice, amplified by Den Den Mushi, was a hypnotic, calming balm. For generations, this world has been plagued by the disease of chaos, he preached, his arms spread wide. The selfish dreams of pirates, the corruption of kings, the endless, pointless cycles of conflict. These are the symptoms. The cause is a lack of order, a lack of will to surrender your chaotic, individual impulses for the sake of a harmonious, peaceful whole. Here in Aegis Port, we have achieved that peace. A world without crime, without poverty, without strife. A perfect society. The crowd listened with rapt, beatific expressions. They weren't just followers, they were believers. Naruto felt a profound sense of wrongness. The natural energy of the island was muted, stifled. It was as if a massive blanket of stillness had been laid over the populace, smoothing out the vibrant, chaotic spikes of emotion, of joy, of anger, of ambition, that made people who they were. It was then that Tiberius looked up, his eyes seeming to find theirs in the crowd, despite the distance. He smiled. And now, to honor our esteemed guests, the Straw Hat Pirates, W.H.O. have journeyed so far to witness our triumph, I shall extend the full blessing of my authority over this district. Let us demonstrate the true potential of a world governed by immutable law. He raised his hand, and a strange, translucent shimmer, like heat haze, emanated from him, washing over the entire port district. The Straw Hats felt a subtle pressure, a conceptual weight settling over them. By the power of the Chitsujo no Mi, the order fruit, I decree the laws of Aegis. Tiberius's voice boomed. Law the first. No act of violence shall be committed within this domain. Harmony is absolute. Law the second. No lie or deliberate deception shall be spoken. Truth is absolute. Law the third. All property is now communal, to be used for the good of the whole. Selfishness is abolished. Aegis Port had been a peaceful prison. Now, it was their cage. The crew retreated to the sunny to regroup, their minds reeling. The trap had been sprung, and it was more insidious than any of them could have imagined. So we can't fight our way out, Zoro growled, his frustration palpable. He had tried to draw a sword as a test, only to find his muscles refusing the command, his body physically incapable of performing an act of violence. And we can't lie our way out, Sanji added, rubbing his temples. He had tried to tell a customs official a small white lie about their cargo. And the words had literally turned to ash in his mouth. Super bad news, guys. Frankie burst out of the workshop. That third law, it means we can't technically stop anyone from just walking on our ship and taking our stuff. And we can't leave, because the port authority won't grant us clearance without a valid reason, and we can't lie to get one. They were paralyzed. Tiberius hadn't locked them in a cell. He had locked them in a system. To fight him would be to become the villains he claimed they were in front of thousands of witnesses. They were caught in a brilliant, maddening web of his own creation. Luffy was vibrating with repressed energy. He was a creature of instinct and action, and this enforced pacifism was a special kind of hell for him. He stomped around the deck. So I Saint have to stand here while that smiley guy wins. I can't punch him. I can't punch him. No, you can't, you idiot. Nami snapped, though her voice was frayed with her own anxiety. Think, this is his game, and he makes the rules. Brute force is what he wants us to try. We have to be smarter. While Nami and Usopp began frantically trying to find a logical loophole, a semantic crack in the laws, Robin sequestered herself in the library. She knew this wasn't a problem of logic, but of philosophy. Tiberius's power was not mind control. If it were, they would all be placidly agreeing with him. It was conceptual. It enforced the rules, but it did not change their minds. And that was the key. She emerged hours later, a single, ancient text in her hand. "I believe I have an idea," she announced, her expression grim but resolute. The book speaks of a similar power from the Void Century. It is absolute, but it requires a foundation of belief. His order is not a force of nature, it is a social contract given terrifying, literal power. The people of Aegis Port have willingly, or subconsciously, accepted his rule in exchange for safety. His authority comes from them. If we can make them reclaim their own will, his laws will have no foundation to stand on. So we have to get a whole city of brainwashed peace lovers to riot. Usopp asked, his voice squeaking. Not a riot, Robin corrected. A revolution. A revolution of the spirit. All eyes turned to Naruto. He had been quiet throughout the debate, his mind churning. He had seen this before, in a different way. He had seen the power of a single person's words to change the hearts of others. He remembered his confrontations with Nagato, with Obito. He had never won those fights with his fists alone. He had won them by breaking their ideals. By showing them another way. She's right, Naruto said, his voice cutting through the tension. We don't have to break his laws. We just have to remind these people what it feels like to be free. To be messy. To be human. The plan was audacious. There would be no stealth, no deception. They would walk into the lion's den. The next day, the Straw Hats walked into the central plaza, where Tiberius was once again delivering his sermon on the virtues of order. They didn't try to sneak onto the stage. They simply walked through the crowd, which parted before them, their placid faces showing flickers of confusion. They stopped at the foot of the dais. Tiberius paused, a serene smile gracing his lips. Ah, our guests of honor have returned. Have you come to accept the wisdom of our ways? No, Naruto said, his voice clear and strong, carrying across the silent plaza. We've come to ask your people a question. Tiberius's smile didn't falter. He was supremely confident in his control. By all means. The law of truth is absolute. Ask what you will. Naruto looked out at the sea of blank faces, at the thousands of people who had traded their souls for safety. He didn't see enemies. He saw victims. He took a deep breath, channeling not the power of Kurama or the sage, but the simple, honest power of his own story. He offers you peace, Naruto began, his voice ringing with an emotional clarity that was a stark contrast to Tiberius's hypnotic drone. And that's a good thing. I've seen war. I've seen so much fighting and hatred and loss, it almost broke me. I understand wanting it to end. He gestured to the pristine city around them. But look at this peace. Where is the laughter? Where are the arguments? Where is the music that makes you want to dance, even if you're terrible at it? Where is the art that is born from a messy, passionate, broken heart? He pointed to a young woman in the front row, a guitar case slung over her back. You're a musician. Under his order, is your music better? Or does it just have perfect rhythm? The woman flinched, her eyes widening. Tiberius's smile finally tightened. The anomaly speaks of chaos as if it were a virtue. I speak of life, Naruto countered, his voice rising. Life isn't neat. It isn't orderly. It's about falling down and having your friends pick you up. It's about trying and failing and trying again. It's about loving someone so much you'd argue with them to keep them safe. He glanced back at Nami, a flicker of a smile on his face. It's about the freedom to make your own mistakes and forge your own path. Even if it's the harder one. He took a step forward, his blue eyes burning with conviction. My whole life, people tried to put me in a box. They called me a monster, a weapon, a failure. They wanted me to be quiet, to be orderly, to not cause trouble. But I refused. I was loud, and I was annoying, and I made a lot of mistakes. But I also made friends. I built a family. I fought for them, and they fought for me. That chaos, that messy, unpredictable struggle, that's what saved me. That's what made me strong. He offers you a cage, Naruto finished, his voice now a powerful roar. That seemed to shake the very stones of the plaza. A safe, comfortable, orderly cage. I'm offering you the sky. Even if you might fall. It's your choice. A profound silence descended. Tiberius looked on, his expression now one of cold fury. His laws were still in place. No one was fighting. No one was lying. But something had changed. The foundation was cracking. Then, a sound. It was small, at first. A single, discordant guitar string being plucked. The young woman in the front row had tears streaming down her face. She fumbled with her guitar and then, with a defiant sob, she struck a chord. It wasn't perfect. It was loud, passionate, and full of a desperate, beautiful pain. It was the most disorderly sound the city had heard in months. It was the first crack in the dam. A child, somewhere in the crowd, let out a peal of genuine, unrestrained laughter. A husband and wife, who had been standing silently side by side, suddenly turned and began to argue, their voices filled with the passion of a long-suppressed disagreement. A cheer went up from a group of sailors. These weren't acts of violence. They weren't lies. But they were violations of the spirit of Tiberius's order. They were individual acts of free will. And the translucent dome of power over the district began to flicker. Tiberius saw his perfect world crumbling. His face contorted in a snarl of righteous fury. You, chaos. He leapt from the balcony. His hands outstretched, aiming not to attack, but to physically impose his will on Naruto. The moment his feet touched the ground with hostile intent, he broke his own first law. The effect was instantaneous. The conceptual framework shattered. Zoro grinned and drew his swords with a satisfying shing. Sanji's leg burst into flame. And Luffy, a spring of rubbery potential coiling for 2 days, finally unleashed a joyous, cathartic roar. But Naruto was faster. As Tiberius lunged, Naruto met him, his fist cocked back. He didn't pour the sage's power into it. He didn't use Kurama's chakra. It was just his own strength, the strength of his own will. Their fists met. There was no earth-shattering explosion. Just a sharp crack, and the sight of Grand Warden Tiberius, the master of order, being thrown back, his arm broken, his illusion of invincibility shattered for all his followers to see. He landed in a heap, his face a mask of disbelief. He was a strategist, a manipulator. In a direct contest of wills, against a man who was the living embodiment of unbreakable spirit, he had lost. He looked at the chaos erupting around him, at his perfect society dissolving back into the messy, vibrant thing it was meant to be. He had been defeated. With a flash of light, his arbiters appeared, surrounding him and executing a flawless, instantaneous tactical retreat. His voice echoed one last time through the plaza, no longer calm or benevolent, but filled with the cold promise of Armageddon. The cataclysm is inevitable. When the world is burning from your chaos, you will beg for the peace of my order. Then they were gone. The people of Aegisport were confused, scared, and gloriously, wonderfully alive. The city was noisy again. It was messy. It was free. The Straw Hats didn't stick around for the celebration. Amid the joyful chaos, they slipped back to their ship, resupplied from a suddenly very grateful port authority, and set sail. As Aegisport faded behind them, the crew was buzzing with the energy of their unique victory. On the deck, Naruto stood between Nami and Robin, watching the horizon. That was a hell of a gamble, trusting a speech to win a fight, Nami said, a proud, brilliant smile on her face. It was never a fight, Robin corrected gently, her own smile carrying the weight of vindicated history. It was an argument, and he had the better point. Naruto looked at the two of them, the navigator who charted the course, the historian who understood the destination, and felt a sense of completeness he hadn't known was possible. They had faced down the leader of their greatest enemy, not with a Rasengan or a gum-gum pistol, but with the strength of their shared conviction. They were a crew, they were a family, and they were ready for the chaos of the new world. Chapter 6 End. Chapter 7. 2 Hearts, 1 Maelstrom. The sea between islands was a gift of quiet grace. After the ideological storm of Aegisport, the tranquil rhythm of the Grand Line was a healing balm. Days were spent in comfortable routine. Luffy fished for sea monsters, Zoro trained against the mast, Sanji created culinary miracles, and the ship sailed on under a vast, benevolent sky. The victory had been profound, not just a triumph of fists but of will, yet it had left a deep and contemplative echo in its wake. The enemy they faced was no longer a distant threat, he had a name, a face, and a terrifyingly seductive philosophy. In this newfound quiet, thoughts that had been suppressed by the constant pressure of battle began to surface. For Nami, the helm of the Sunny had become a place of restless introspection. She would chart their course with her usual meticulous skill, her hands moving with the practiced grace of a master craftsman, but her mind would drift. She would find herself replaying Naruto's speech in the plaza, the raw, unvarnished power of his belief. She remembered the warmth of his hand on hers in the map room, a simple gesture that had felt more grounding than any anchor. She was falling for him. It was a fact as undeniable as the North Star. And it terrified her. Love, in her experience, was a vulnerability. It was a target that your enemies could aim for. She had built walls around her heart with the same precision she used to draw her maps, each one designed to keep the world at a safe, transactional distance. Naruto Uzumaki, with his ridiculously bright smile and the ancient sadness in his eyes, had not broken those walls down. He had simply walked through them as if they weren't there. This feeling was a current she couldn't chart, a weather pattern she couldn't predict, and the loss of control was maddening. One evening, under a brilliant canopy of stars that glittered like spilled diamonds, she found she couldn't stand it anymore. The solitude of the helm was no longer a comfort, it was an echo chamber for her own confused heart. Seeking a different kind of quiet, she made her way down to the library. A soft light spilled from under the door. She pushed it open to find a scene of profound tranquility. Nico Robin was not reading. She sat in a plush armchair near the large, curved glass of the aquarium wall. Her silhouette framed by the gentle, blue-green glow of the water. Bioluminescent jellyfish pulsed with soft light, and a school of neon tetra drifted past like a living constellation. Robin's gaze was fixed on the silent, graceful dance, her expression thoughtful and serene. She seemed as much a part of the deep, quiet mystery as the creatures she was watching. "Couldn't sleep?" Nami asked softly, not wanting to break the spell. Robin turned, her lips curving into a small, welcoming smile. "The sea is telling its own stories tonight. I was merely listening." She gestured to the chair opposite hers. "Please, join me." Nami sank into the chair, the silence of the library a comfortable blanket. For a moment, they just watched the fish together. "I can't focus," Nami admitted finally, the words tumbling out in a frustrated rush. "My log pose is stable, the currents are predictable, but I feel like we're sailing into a fog I can't see. My head it's a mess." Robin's gaze shifted from the aquarium to Nami, her eyes holding a deep, empathetic understanding. "It is not the sea that is troubling you, Navigator San. It is the maelstrom that we have invited onto our ship." Nami flinched slightly at the word. Maelstrom. Uzumaki. It was a perfect description. "He's a lot," she understated, her fingers tracing the patterns on the arm of the chair. "He is," Robin agreed, her voice a soft murmur. "He is a man of impossible contradictions. He holds the power of a god of destruction, yet he wields it with the sole purpose of protecting others. He has a spirit of unbreakable optimism, yet he is built upon a foundation of the most profound loneliness I have ever sensed." Her gaze was direct, yet gentle. It is only natural that such a man would have a powerful effect on those around him. The unspoken words hung in the air between them, shimmering in the blue light of the aquarium. It was Nami who finally gave them a voice, her pragmatism winning out over her reluctance. "You feel it too, don't you?" It wasn't an accusation. It was a simple, honest question between two women who had come to respect each other immensely. Robin did not feign ignorance. She gave a slow, deliberate nod. "It would be a lie to say I did not." There was no shame in her admission, only a quiet certainty. "In all my years of searching for the poneglyphs, I have been chasing the ghosts of the past. In Naruto-san, I have found a living piece of that history. But it is more than that." She leaned forward slightly, her voice dropping, becoming more intimate. "When Cypher Pole arrived on that island, for a moment, I was not Nico Robin, the archaeologist of the Straw Hat Pirates. I was the devil child again, alone and hunted, watching my world burn. But he stood in front of me. He didn't see me as a weapon or a political tool or a key to the past. He saw a person who was hurting, and he simply stood in the way. He understands what it is to be a monster in the eyes of the world. That is a connection I never thought I would find. Hearing her own complex feelings echoed in Robin's calm, articulate words was a strange relief for Nami. For me, it's his trust, she confessed, her voice barely a whisper. Everyone else sees my skill with a map or my greed for treasure. Even the crew. They trust my navigation, but they think I'm bossy and money-grubbing. She smiled faintly, which I am, but he's different. In Port Felicity, he saw my plan. He saw me. He didn't question it. He just put his impossible power in my hands and said, "Tell me what to do." He makes me feel safe. Not just protected, but safe in my own mind. It's terrifying. They sat in that shared confession, the silent fish their only witnesses. There was no jealousy in the air. No sense of rivalry or competition. There was only a mutual, startling realization. They had both, in their own completely different ways, fallen for the same impossible man. "So what do we do?" Nami asked, the question raw and practical. It was the navigator in her, demanding a chart for these uncharted waters. It was Robin who offered not a map, but a change in perspective. "Perhaps we are asking the wrong question," she mused. "The question is not, what do we do? But, what does a man like him truly need?" They considered it. They thought of Naruto's boundless energy, his self-sacrificing recklessness, the crushing weight of the destiny that had followed him into this new world. He was a force of nature, a maelstrom of will and power and emotion. A man like that couldn't be contained or possessed. He needed an anchor, or perhaps, more than one. "He tries to carry everything himself," Nami said, thinking of his frantic, solo training after the fight with Serafina. "He thinks every burden is his alone. He is followed by a shadow that has haunted him since birth," Robin added, thinking of his story of the 9 tails. "A loneliness that runs so deep, I doubt he even recognizes it as a constant companion anymore." A new understanding began to dawn between them, forged in the quiet, blue-lit room. They were not rivals for his affection. They were, perhaps, 2 essential pieces of the harbor he so desperately needed. Nami, with her fierce, pragmatic loyalty, could be the anchor that kept him grounded in the here and now, managing the chaos around him. Robin, with her quiet wisdom and shared understanding of his burdens, could be the lighthouse, a steady beam cutting through the fog of his past and helping him navigate the history that was hunting him. It was not a conscious plan, not a formal agreement to be shared. It was a subtle, profound realignment of their purpose. A silent pact. Nami was the first to give it voice, in her own way. She let out a long breath and a small, wry smile touched her lips. "So, our job is to keep him from being a self-sacrificing idiot, and I get to yell at him when he is." Robin's smile widened, reaching her eyes. "And I shall endeavor to ensure he ever feels he has to face the ghosts of the past alone. We shall be his compass and his chronicle. Together." The tension in Nami's shoulders finally, truly eased. It wasn't a solution, but it was a direction. It was enough. As if their conclusion had summoned the topic, Robin's expression grew more serious, shifting from the personal to the political. "Our pact may be more critical than we know," she said, her voice lowering. "Tiberius's conviction at Aegis Port, his certainty about a coming cataclysm, it has been bothering me." She stood and retrieved her notes from the library table. The poneglyph said the first anomaly, the visitor from the void century, was a force of great change. Tiberius believes that change was the cataclysm itself. I believe the 20 kingdoms used the chaos caused by the visitor's arrival as a pretext to seize power and form the world government. They didn't prevent a catastrophe, they redefined it to suit their narrative. She looked at Nami, her eyes dark with the weight of her theory. The Wardens aren't just trying to stop Naruto. They are trying to prevent a repeat of the event that led to the Void Century. They will not hesitate to burn the entire world to the ground if they believe it is necessary to correct the narrative and stop him. Protecting him is no longer just about protecting our friend. It may very well be about preventing another global war. The weight of their conversation settled, heavy and absolute. Their quiet, personal feelings were now inextricably linked to the fate of the world. Later that night, the rest of the crew was asleep. The only sounds were the creak of the ship and the gentle sigh of the sea. Naruto was on the deck, Not training, just sitting on the lion's head, staring up at the river of stars. As trying to find the constellations from his own world and finding none, a simple, poignant reminder of how far he was from home. He heard soft footsteps behind him. Nami appeared, holding a thick, woolen blanket. She didn't say a word, just walked up and draped it over his shoulders. A moment later, Robin arrived from the other side, holding a steaming mug. She pressed it into his hands. It was a warm, fragrant tea. They didn't speak. Nami stood on one side of him, Robin on the other, and together, the three of them looked up at the foreign, beautiful stars. Naruto didn't understand what had shifted. What unspoken agreement had been reached in the quiet corners of the ship. He just knew that the crushing loneliness that was his constant companion had, for the first time, loosened its grip. The maelstrom in his heart felt the pull of two steady, unwavering stars, and for a moment, it was calm. Chapter 7 End. Chapter 8. The God of Shinobi Unleashed. The calm did not last. The sea, which had been a cradle of quiet contemplation, turned into an executioner's block with terrifying speed. It began not with a cannonball or a storm, but with a silence. An unnatural silence, deeper and more absolute than the dead air of the calm belt. The cheerful splash of waves against the Sunny's hull ceased. The cry of a distant gull was sliced cleanly from the air. Even the wind died, the straw hawk, Jolly Roger hanging limp and lifeless against the mast. From the depths, it rose. The same sleek, silent, white submarine they had seen before. It surfaced without a ripple, a ghost ship of impossible technology. A hatch hissed open, and three figures emerged, taking their place on its deck. They wore the same white and gold uniforms as Serafina, but their presence was vastly different. Where she had been serene, they were a trinity of cold, hard purpose. One was a mountain of a man, bald and broad, his face a stoic mask. The second was a woman, lithe and sharp, with short-cut black hair and eyes that seemed to dissect everything they saw. The third was a slender man who stood with a theatrical, almost languid posture, a cruel smirk playing on his lips. By decree of the Grand Warden, the mountain, Arbiter Gaius, boomed. His voice a low rumble that vibrated in their bones. The correction of the prime anomaly, Naruto Uzumaki, is now absolute. All collateral entities will be pacified. Do not resist. There was no preamble, no negotiation. This was not a warning, it was a sentence. Luffy didn't hesitate. He was a creature of pure reaction, and his friends were being threatened. Gum gum. Gatling. A storm of rubbery fists blurred across the 100-meter gap, a barrage that had overwhelmed countless powerful foes. Gaius, the mountain, simply raised a hand, palm open. A faint, almost invisible shimmer, like a distortion in the air, expanded from him. Luffy's fists didn't bounce off. They didn't explode on impact. They simply stopped. Their kinetic energy was bled away into nothingness. And they fell from the air like limp noodles, splashing uselessly into the sea. My Kaiomu no Mi allows me to create a null energy field, Gaius stated, his voice flat and devoid of pride. Your violent impulses are erased. Stand down. Like hell we will. Zoro was already in motion, three swords drawn. He didn't waste energy on a ranged attack. He used the deck of the submarine as a stepping stone, launching himself directly at the trio. His blades, coated in the dark sheen of armament hockey, were aimed for the woman. Onigiri. The woman, Arbiter Lyra, didn't even try to block. Her movements were impossibly fast, a flicker of motion. Her gloved fingers brushed against Zoro's swords as he swung. The world's greatest swordsman felt a sensation that was alien and horrifying. It wasn't that his swords were blocked or parried. It was that they suddenly felt dead. The connection he had with them, the extension of his own soul that he had honed over a lifetime of training, was severed. They were no longer the legendary Wado Ikimonji, Sandai Kidetsu, and Shisui. They were just three heavy, awkward pieces of sharpened steel in his hands. The flawless arc of his attack faltered, and he stumbled, his mind reeling from the psychic whiplash. My Kazuna no Mi severs the bonds between things, Lyra explained, her voice as sharp and precise as a scalpel. Your swords are now just metal. Your ambition, just a memory. You were disarmed, Roronoa Zoro. While they were reeling from this conceptual assault, the third arbiter, Morpheus, laughed. It was a high, unpleasant sound. My turn to play. He clapped his hands together once, and the world dissolved into madness. Suddenly, the thousand sunny was wreathed in black flames. Nami screamed as the deck beneath her feet seemed to turn to writhing snakes. Usopp saw 1,000 marine battleships cresting the horizon, their cannons all aimed at him. Frankie watched in horror as the ship's hull cracked and splintered, the wood groaning as if in agony. It was a shared, multi-sensory hallucination, perfectly tailored to their deepest fears. Gine no mi. Morpheus cackled. The phantasm fruit. Welcome to my theater of the mind. This was the warden's answer to the Straw Hats. Not a single, powerful warrior, but a perfectly synergistic unit. Gaius, the shield who negated all energy and momentum. Lyra, the scalpel who severed the bonds that gave her enemies their strength. And Morpheus, the saboteur who turned their minds against them, preventing any hope of a coordinated defense. They were a team designed to systematically dismantle their opponents, piece by agonizing piece. Their primary target, however, had yet to move. Naruto stood on the deck, his blue eyes wide with a cold, analytical fury. He saw through the illusions. Sage mode cut through the phantom flames and spectral ships, revealing the truth of the world, but he saw the very real terror on his friends' faces. He felt the conceptual attacks of the other two arbiters, a pressure unlike any hockey. He had to end this. Now, he created a dozen shadow clones, sending them scattering across the ship to snap their friends out of the hallucinations. He himself gathered a spiraling vortex of wind and chakra in his palm. Wind style. Recenshuriken. He poured as much power as he dared into it and flung it. The shrieking disk of death flew true. But as it entered Gaius's null energy field, it suffered the same fate as Luffy's fists. The sound died, the rotation slowed, and the intricate, destructive power unraveled into a harmless gust of wind. Your chaotic energy is the most offensive of all, anomaly, Gaius rumbled. As Naruto was momentarily stunned by the failure of his ultimate jutsu, Lyra moved. She was on the Sunny's railing in an instant. A blur of white and gold. Her target was not Naruto, but the bonds that gave him strength. She reached for him, her fingers outstretched, aiming to sever his connection to Sage Mode, to Kurama. To his very chakra network. But Sanji was there, his leg a blur of black, intercepting her. Get your damn hands off him. Lyra smiled, a cold, predatory thing. Her fingers brushed against Sanji's leg mid-kick. The brilliant flame of his diable Hambi was instantly extinguished. Worse, he felt the bond to his own explosive speed, his very Vinsmoke heritage, flicker and die. His kick, which should have shattered stone, landed with a dull, powerless thud. Lyra used his momentum to spin past him, her eyes still locked on Naruto. But she wasn't the only one with a target. While the others were occupied, a stray news coup, a seagull journalist delivering papers, had been caught in the unnatural stillness. Its camera Den Mushi, a small snail with a lens for an eye, was broadcasting. Its feed picked up by receivers across the globe. The world, from the Sabayati archipelago to Dressrosa, from Marineford to the revolutionary base on Baltigo, was now watching the events unfold in real time. They were watching the systematic, terrifying dismantling of the Straw Hat Pirates. And they were about to witness the birth of a god. Lyra was almost upon Naruto. Nami, having been snapped out of her illusion by a clone, saw the danger. Her Klima tact was in her hands, but what could she do against an enemy who severed concepts? She did the only thing she could. She threw herself in Lyra's path. Get away from him, she screamed. Lyra's expression was one of mild annoyance. A foolish bond of loyalty. I shall sever that as well. Her fingers touched Nami's forehead. It wasn't a physical blow. Nami felt no pain. She just felt a disconnect. The bond between her mind and her body, the bioelectrical signals that commanded her limbs to move, was momentarily cut. Her eyes went wide, and then she crumpled to the deck, limp and lifeless as a discarded doll. To Naruto, she was dead. The world stopped. The frantic sounds of battle, the cackling of Morpheus, the panicked cries of his friends, it all faded into a deafening silence. All he could see was Nami's still form on the deck, her orange hair splayed out like a bloody sunset. All he could feel was the echo of every loss he had ever endured. Jiraiya sinking into the depths. Neji falling on the battlefield. His parents, whom he'd never known. The cold, crushing loneliness of his childhood. It all coalesced into a single, unbearable point of agony in his chest. And then it broke. A pressure, vast and ancient and terrifying, erupted from him. It was not hockey. It was heavier. It was the pressure of a star being born, of a tectonic plate shifting. The sky above the sunny darkened, not with clouds, but as if the very color was being drained from it. The sea began to boil. Arbiter Gaius's null energy field, Wick, had effortlessly erased every other attack, flickered and shattered like glass. The illusions woven by Morpheus were burned away by a light that was not of this world. Lyra, who had been standing over Nami's body, was thrown back as if by an invisible explosion, a look of pure, primal terror on her face. A chakra, gold and incandescent, so dense it was almost physical, erupted from Naruto, cloaking him in a roaring torrent of power. It was not the angry red of the Nine Tails. This was the divine gold of the Sage of Six Paths, a power not meant for this world. Naruto's voice was a low, guttural whisper that was somehow audible over the roaring energy. He looked up, and his eyes were no longer blue. They were slitted, glowing gold, and they held no mercy. Will not take anyone else from me. The golden energy exploded outwards, solidifying. It formed the skeletal structure of a colossal being, then layered on muscle, then skin. It rose up, dwarfing the Thousand Sunny, a titanic avatar of a nine-tailed fox. Forged from pure, solidified, golden energy. It was Kurama, but transfigured, elevated to something divine. A living god of destruction now stood in the middle of the grand line. Its roar a sound that shook the foundations of the world. The arbiters, who had been the picture of cold, professional control, could only stare, their minds unable to process the scale of the being before them. Impossible, Gaius breathed. Such energy, it violates all known laws. Inside the avatar's head, Naruto was a figure of pure light. He raised a hand, and the avatar mimicked the gesture. It opened its massive jaws, and particles of positive and negative chakra, black and white, condensed into a sphere of unimaginable density. A tailed beast bomb. This is not an energy to be nullified, Naruto's voice boomed, seeming to come from the avatar itself. This is the end. He fired. The sphere of darkness shot forward. Gaius instinctively threw up his null energy field, but it was like trying to stop a supernova with a pane of glass. The tailed beast bomb didn't slow. It didn't dissipate. It simply consumed the null field, consumed the space it occupied, and slammed into the white submarine. The resulting explosion was absolute. It did not go boom. It was a silent, terrifying sphere of blackness that expanded, erasing the submarine and the three arbiters from existence. The sea itself was vaporized, leaving a massive, steaming crater in the ocean that slowly began to fill with boiling waterfalls. The world, watching through the lens of a single, terrified snail, was silent. They had just witnessed a pirate, a man, unleash a power that could challenge the ancient weapons. A power that could unmake the world. On the deck of the Sunny, the Straw Hats stared up at the golden god that was their friend. They felt no fear of him, only a profound, earth-shaking awe. The avatar slowly dissolved, the golden energy receding back into Naruto as he collapsed to his knees, his body steaming. He crawled over to Nami's still form, his hands trembling as he reached for her. And then, she coughed. A ragged, hacking cough as her mind re-established its connection to her body. Her eyes fluttered open. Naruto, she whispered, confused. What happened? The relief that washed over him was so powerful it was physically painful. He didn't answer. He just gently gathered her into his arms. Burying his face in her hair, the god of destruction replaced by a boy who was just terrified of being alone again. Far away, in his sanctum in Mary Geois, Grand Warden Tiberius watched the broadcast feed go dark. His face was not one of shock or anger. It was calm, triumphant. He looked at the five elders, who stood behind him, their faces ashen masks of horror. "You see now," Tiberius said, his voice quiet and absolute. "I told you what the prophecies foretold. The anomaly is not a threat to be managed. It is the cataclysm itself, given flesh. The arbiters have failed. My gambit has failed." He turned to them, his eyes gleaming with the cold, hard light of righteous fanaticism. "Now, you will authorize my final solution." The order must be preserved. Even if the world must be broken and remade to do so. Chapter 8 End. Chapter 9. The quiet before the storm. The world held its breath. The silence that followed the explosion was more profound than the blast itself. On the deck of the Thousand Sunny, the Straw Hats stood frozen, staring at the steaming, circular wound in the ocean where their enemies had ceased to exist. The air was thick with the scent of ozone and something else. Something ancient and divine, like the inside of a thundercloud. The colossal, golden avatar of Kurama, a being of myth and fury, faded like a dying star, its light receding into the kneeling figure of their friend. Shock gave way to a frantic, adrenalized rush of action. Chopper, his eyes wide with a mixture of medical terror and awe, was the first to move, scrambling toward Naruto. Sanji lit a cigarette with a trembling hand, the familiar ritual a desperate anchor in the face of the impossible. Zoro sheathed his swords, his gaze fixed on Naruto, a new, complex understanding dawning in his eyes. He had always sought the pinnacle of strength, and he had just seen a power that dwarfed his ambitions into insignificance. But all of that was secondary. The first priority was Nami. Naruto's crawl across the deck was agonizingly slow. The divine power had left him hollowed out, his muscles screaming, his chakra reserves a barren wasteland. He reached Nami's side, just as her body gave a convulsive cough, the connection between her mind and her limbs re-establishing itself with a painful, biological reboot. Her eyes, hazy and confused, fluttered open. "Naruto," she whispered, the single word a question that encompassed a universe of confusion. What happened?" The relief that struck Naruto was a physical force, so potent it nearly made him pass out. He didn't have the words to answer. He couldn't explain the abyss he had stared into when he thought she was gone, or the terrifying, glorious power that had answered his grief. He just gathered her into his arms, his body trembling with the aftershocks of his transformation, and held on as if she were the only solid thing in a world that had come unmoored. It was Robin who brought them back to the grim reality. Her face was pale, but her mind was already calculating the consequences. "The Den Den Mushi," she said, her voice strained, pointing to the news coup that was now frantically trying to fly away. The entire world just saw that. The implication settled on them like a shroud. They weren't just wanted pirates anymore. They were the keepers of a living, breathing ancient weapon. The world's governments, its emperors, its revolutionaries, every major power had just witnessed the arrival of a new, terrifying player on the global stage. They had to disappear. Nami, still weak but with the fire of command returning to her eyes, pushed herself upright, leaning on Naruto for support. "Get me to the map room," she ordered, her voice raspy but firm. "There's a cluster of islands in the Sea of Respite, mostly uninhabited. Bad currents, weird magnetic fields. A good place to get lost." They sailed with a desperate urgency, Frankie pushing the Sunny's engine to its absolute limit. They fled the scene of their terrifying victory, running not from an enemy, but from the shadow their own power had cast. 2 days later, they found it, a small, crescent-shaped island, nestled in a seative ring of jagged sea stacks that tore at the currents and confused any log pose not expertly guided. It was a haven of lush, green jungle, a white sand cove, and a profound, healing silence. A safe harbor. Physically, Naruto recovered quickly, his Uzumaki vitality, bolstered by Kurama's presence, knitted his strained muscles and refilled his chakra network. But emotionally, he was a ghost. He had touched a part of himself he never knew existed, a power born not from training or determination, but from the absolute certainty of loss. It was a cold, quiet, divine rage, and the memory of it terrified him. He had not just defeated the arbiters, he had erased them. He had looked upon his enemies and, for a fleeting, terrible moment, had felt the serene, absolute power of a god passing judgment. He began to isolate himself. While the others set up a camp on the beach, he would retreat deep into the island's jungle, or sit for hours on the highest cliff, staring out at the empty sea. He was trying to understand what had happened, to get a handle on the cataclysmic force slumbering within him. Was this the Sage of Six Paths, power? Was it Kurama, or was it something new, something born of his arrival in this world? He was afraid to even try and access it again, terrified of what might happen if he lost control. The crew, sensing his turmoil, gave him a wide berth. They would watch him from a distance. Their faces etched with worry, their usual boisterous camaraderie replaced by a quiet, shared concern. Nami felt his withdrawal like a physical ache. A heavy guilt had settled in her heart. She knew, with unwavering certainty, that his terrifying transformation was her fault. He had unleashed that power because he thought he had lost her. She felt responsible not only for his pain but for the global target his actions had painted on all their backs. She had to do something. On the third day, she found him on the cliffside, staring at the horizon. The wind whipped his blonde hair around his face, and he looked smaller than he ever had before, a lonely figure against the vastness of the ocean. Sanji had prepared a tray of food for him, onigiri, grilled fish, fresh fruit, but he hadn't come to get it. Nami picked it up, her resolve hardening. She walked up the cliff path and sat down a few feet away from him. She didn't speak, she just placed the tray between them. He glanced at it, then back at the sea, his jaw tight. The silence stretched, filled only by the wind and the cry of gulls. For a full hour, she just sat there, a quiet, unwavering presence. Finally, without a word, he reached out, picked up an onigiri, and took a small bite. It was a concession, an acknowledgement. A tiny crack in the wall he had built around himself. From then on, it became their ritual. 3 times a day, Nami would bring him his meals. She never pushed him to talk, never asked what was wrong. She just shared his space, his silence, anchoring him to the simple, undeniable reality that he was not alone. And that he still needed to eat. Robin understood Naruto's struggle on a different level. She saw a man grappling not just with power, but with a label. The world had just seen him as a monster. And she knew he was now seeing himself through their eyes. She knew from her own painful past that logic and reason were often useless against such deep-seated fear. You couldn't tell someone they weren't a monster. You had to show them. She found him one afternoon near a freshwater stream in the heart of the jungle. He was skipping stones across the water's surface, each thwip a small physical distraction from the maelstrom in his head. She was carrying a thick, leather-bound book. Like Nami, she didn't intrude on his solitude directly. She found a comfortable spot on a mossy rock nearby, opened the book, and began to read aloud. Her voice was calm and melodic, a gentle current in the jungle's quiet. She read from a collection of myths from the South Blue. He read of the sun god whose laughter could bring forth life, and whose tears could cause world-drowning floods. She read of the forest spirit, a creature of terrifying power that protected its home with a wrath that shook the mountains, but could also guide lost children to safety. She read stories of beings whose power was inextricably linked to their emotions, beings who were both creators and destroyers, feared and worshipped. She never looked at him. She simply let the stories fill the space between them. They were her answer to his unspoken question. They were her way of saying, your struggle is not new. Great power has always been a heavy and chaotic burden. You are not a monster. You are a myth in the making. The emotional climax arrived on a warm, starless night. Drawn by an instinct he didn't understand, Naruto had ventured to the island's most secluded spot, a hidden grotto, where a powerful waterfall crashed into a deep, crystal-clear pool. The roar of the water was a physical presence, a sound that was both violent and cleansing. He sat on a flat rock at the water's edge, cross-legged, trying to meditate, trying to reach out to Kurama, to find some wisdom in the ancient being that shared his soul. He felt their presence before he saw them. Nami and Robin emerged from the jungle path together, moving with an unspoken, synchronized purpose. They approached and sat on either side of him, the roar of the waterfall cocooning the three of them in a private world. For a long time, no one spoke. Then, Naruto's voice, raw and strained, cut through the noise. What if Tiberius was right? The question hung in the spray of the waterfall, heavy and terrifying. What if I am the cataclysm? He continued, his voice cracking. He wouldn't look at them, his gaze fixed on the churning water. When I saw you fall, Nami, I felt something break inside me. And the power that came out, it was cold. It was so cold. I felt like I could have erased the entire world, and it would have been easy. He finally turned, and in the dim light of the grotto, they could see the tears tracking paths through the dirt on his cheeks. And a part of me, A terrible, small part of me wanted to. Because it meant none of you would ever be in danger again. Does that make me a monster? His confession, his deepest, most secret fear, was laid bare. Nami was the first to answer. She reached out and took his hand. Her grip was firm, her skin warm and real against his cold one. I'm the one who was lying on that deck, Naruto, she said, her voice shaking but fierce. I felt my body just shut down. I couldn't move, couldn't think. I was gone, and the next thing I knew, you were there, and the world was safe again. She squeezed his hand. I didn't see a monster. I saw the person who just saved my life. I saw my friend. As Nami held his one hand, Robin reached out and gently took the other. Her touch was different, calm, steady, and deeply reassuring. History is written by those with power. Naruto-san, she said, her voice a soft counterpoint to the roaring water. And it is full of men and women who were called monsters simply because their power was too great to be understood. You did not unleash that devastation for conquest, or for glory, or out of hatred. You unleashed it out of love. She met his tear-filled gaze, her own eyes holding an unshakable conviction. An act of love, no matter how terrifying its form, can never be monstrous. He looked from Nami's fierce, loyal face to Robin's wise, empathetic one. He felt the grounding warmth of Nami's hand, the anchor to his heart. He felt the steady reassurance of Robin's, the lighthouse for his soul. They were not offering him a choice. They were offering him a balance. They were two essential, irreplaceable pillars. And they were refusing to let him crumble. The fear didn't vanish. The terrifying memory of that cold, divine power was still there. But it was no longer his burden to carry alone. The maelstrom of fear and guilt inside him finally found its center, a quiet point of stability held firmly by the two women at his side. He didn't speak. He just squeezed their hands, a silent acknowledgement, a profound acceptance. They sat there for a long time, the three of them, a tiny island of warmth and understanding against the roaring power of the waterfall. As they finally stood to walk back to the camp, the first light of dawn was beginning to break over the horizon. The quiet before the storm was over. But they would face the coming hurricane together. Chapter 9 End. Chapter 10. The Warden's Order. The Pirates' Freedom. The dawn that broke over their hidden island was soft and forgiving. For a week, this secluded cove had been their sanctuary, a place to heal not just their bodies, but the frayed edges of their spirits. A fragile peace had settled, woven from the quiet rituals of Nami's patient care, Robin's gentle stories, and the crew's unspoken, unwavering support. The god of destruction had been put to rest, and in his place, Naruto Uzumaki was slowly, tentatively, finding his footing as a man again. He was meditating on the beach, feeling the gentle ebb and flow of the tide. When he felt it, a tremor in the world's natural energy. It wasn't an earthquake or a storm. It was a deep, resonant hum, a single, discordant note played on a planetary scale. It emanated from everywhere and nowhere at once, a feeling of profound, artificial order being imposed upon the very fabric of reality. At the same time, on the deck of the Sunny, the Den Mush eye that had been left on for news began to ring, not with its usual purru, but with a single, sustained, commanding tone. Frankie answered, and a moment later, his voice, stripped of its usual bravado, boomed across the cove. Guys, you need to see this. The whole world needs to see this. They gathered around the main transceiver in the galley. The image was stark. Grand Warden Tiberius stood before the empty throne in the heart of Pangaea Castle, a place of almost mythical significance. His arm was in a sling, a visible reminder of his defeat at Aegis Port, but his expression was one of absolute, triumphant serenity. He was broadcasting on every channel, military and civilian, across the entire world. People of the world, his voice began, a calm, hypnotic wave of sound. For 800 years, you have lived under the benevolent, if imperfect, protection of the world government. We have offered you stability. We have offered you law. But we have allowed the chaotic disease of individual will to fester. Piracy, rebellion, the selfish pursuit of dreams, these are the symptoms of a world that has forgotten the virtue of true order. The image cut to a grainy, terrifying replay. The feed from the news coup. They saw the golden, nine-tailed avatar rise from the sea. They saw it unleash a power that vaporized the ocean itself. 2 weeks ago, Tiberius continued, his voice laced with a sorrowful gravity. The prophecy of the void century was made manifest. An anomaly, a being of impossible, chaotic power, revealed its true nature. The cataclysm is not a coming storm, it is already here. Wearing the face of a man. We, the wardens of order, attempted a surgical correction. We failed. Our failure has proven one undeniable truth. Humanity, in its current state, cannot be trusted with its own freedom. Your chaotic hearts are a liability the world can no longer afford. He stepped aside, gesturing to the empty throne. Behind it, the very air began to shimmer. An immense, intricate lattice of what looked like solidified light and sea prism stone materialized, humming with that same discordant, global note. It was a machine woven into the very structure of the castle, an ancient and terrible engine. This is the celestial silence, Tiberius announced, his voice rising to a messianic fervor. An instrument of salvation, created by the 20 founding kings to be used only in the face of absolute chaos. It does not kill, it does not destroy, it simply calms. When activated, its resonant frequency will span the globe, touching every living being. Those with wills that are too strong, too chaotic, too ambitious, those who are the sources of the world's endless conflict, will simply be reset. Their minds will be wiped clean, their spirits return to a state of placid, peaceful infancy. There will be no more kings, no more pirates, no more revolutionaries. No more dreams, only the perfect, silent, beautiful harmony of absolute order. He placed his hand on a glowing console. The age of man is over. The age of order has begun. For the good of the world, I enact the final mandate. A wave of visible, shimmering energy pulsed outwards from the red line, spreading across the globe like an ethereal tsunami. On the deck of the Sunny, they felt it pass over them, a psychic pressure, a gentle but insistent whisper in the back of their minds telling them to let go, to stop struggling. To be at peace. It was Naruto's roar of pure, defiant will that broke the spell. He's not resetting the world. He's erasing it. The weight of the situation was crushing, absolute. This wasn't a battle for an island or a kingdom. It was a battle for the soul of the world itself. Luffy, who had been watching with a thunderous expression, smashed his fist into the galley table, splintering the wood. I don't care about prophecies or orders, he growled, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. No one gets to tell people they can't have dreams. He turned to his crew, his eyes burning with the fire of a king. We're going to marry Geoise. We're going to kick his ass and shut that shiny thing off. It was an insane, impossible plan. A single pirate ship against the full, concentrated might of the world government at its very heart. But they were not a single pirate ship. As if on cue, a smaller den mushi on Nami's desk began to ring frantically. It was a line they had given out months ago. A line connected to a Vivre card. Nami answered, her face pale. Luffy senpai. A hysterical, worshipful voice screamed from the other end. It was Bartolomeo. We saw it. We saw the whole thing. The Golden Fox God. The world-ending explosion. And now this crazy guy on the TV. The Bardo Club is ready. The entire Straw Hat Grand Fleet is mobilizing. Just give us the order, and we will tear the red line down for you. A slow, fierce grin spread across Luffy's face. He took the receiver. Bardo, get everyone you can. Meet us at Mary Geoise. We're gonna throw the biggest party this world has ever seen. The race was on. The Thousand Sunny burst from its hidden cove, Frankie feeding it every last drop of cola they had for a coup de burst that launched them clear of the treacherous currents. They sailed with a speed born of desperation, Nami at the helm, her eyes blazing, navigating the fastest, most dangerous route toward the red line. 3 days later, they arrived. And it was a vision from a warlord's nightmare. The sea around the Holy Land was a churning mass of ships. The full might of the Marines, every vice admiral and pacifista they could muster, had foe. RMED, a defensive line of impossible scale. But against them, a chaotic, vibrant, and utterly fearless armada was crashing. The Straw Hat Grand Fleet, 5,600 strong, had answered the call. The beautiful pirates, led by Cavendish, sliced through the marine ranks, Hakuba a terrifying blur of silver. The Tontata pirates, led by Leo, were a swarm of invisible saboteurs, disabling cannons and cutting rigging. Don Sai and the Happo Navy smashed through hulls with their Hashoken. And at the center of it all, a single, garishly decorated ship, the Going Luffy Senpei, was projected forward. Protected on all sides by Bartolomeo's perfect, unbreakable barriers. It was the ultimate diversion. Now's our chance. Nami yelled over the din of cannon fire and shouting. While they're distracted, Zoro stood at the prow. His 3 swords drawn, a bloodthirsty grin on his face. How are we getting up there? Naruto appeared beside him, already cloaked in the golden chakra of his Kurama Sage mode. A massive, spectral golden arm, a construct of pure energy, erupted from his back. It reached down, enveloping the Thousand Sunny in its protective grasp. We're flying, Naruto said. With a roar of effort, he propelled them upwards, lifting the entire ship from the sea. They soared into the sky, a golden comet ascending the impossible, crimson cliff of the Red Line. They bypassed the formal routes, the bubble lifts, and the guards, landing with a jarring crash in the pristine, manicured gardens of the holy city itself. The moment their feet touched the ground, the final battle began. The remaining arbiters, the elite of the elite, descended upon them, along with the holy knights. It was a desperate, chaotic battle through the immaculate streets of the world's capital. Luffy, Zoro, and Sanji, the monster trio, formed the spearhead. You guys go on ahead. Luffy yelled, his body already steaming in gear second. We'll handle the welcome party. Naruto, Nami, and Robin broke off. Naruto creating a phalanx of shadow clones to carve a path through the lesser guards. They ran through the city of the gods, a maelstrom of orange, a blur of blue, a whisper of purple, there go. Al the looming Pangaea castle at its heart. They burst into the throne room to a scene of chilling calm. The battle outside might as well have been in another world. Tiberius stood before the humming, glowing celestial silence. His expression one of placid disappointment. He was alone. So, the chaos arrives at the heart of order, he said, his voice calm. I must confess, I had hoped you would be erased before you reached me. It would have been a more merciful end. It's over, Tiberius, Naruto yelled, taking a step forward. Over, my dear boy, it has just begun, Tiberius said with a paternal smile. He raised a hand. Law. Within this sanctum, the past cannot be altered, its lessons are absolute. Robin stumbled, a hand flying to her head. A wave of psychic force washed over her, not an illusion, but the conceptual weight of every tragedy she had ever endured. The flames of Ohara, the betrayals, the loneliness, it all became an absolute, unchangeable truth in her mind, threatening to drown her in fatalism. Law, Tiberius continued, his other hand rising. The natural world is chaotic and unpredictable. Therefore, within this sanctum, it cannot be understood or charted. Nami cried out, clutching her temples. Her innate, almost supernatural connection to the world, the feel of the wind, the scent of rain, the subtle shifts in atmospheric pressure, was severed. She was a navigator adrift, her greatest strength rendered meaningless. And finally, Tiberius said, his gaze falling on Naruto, his eyes glowing with the full power of the order fruit. Anomalies are a violation of the natural narrative. Therefore, law, you do not exist. It was the ultimate attack. A conceptual erasure. Naruto felt a pressure that dwarfed anything he had ever experienced. The world seemed to thin around him. His own life force flickering like a candle in a hurricane. He was an error in the code of reality, and Tiberius was hitting delete. But Naruto Uzumaki's entire existence had been a defiance of the rules. He was the outcast who became a hero. The monster who became a savior. The child of prophecy who chose to write his own destiny. He roared, a sound of pure, indomitable will. The golden chakra of the Sage of Six Paths erupted around him, a power that did not obey the laws of this world, but imposed its own. Your laws don't apply to me, he bellowed, his voice breaking the conceptual hold. My existence isn't something you can just erase. His sheer willpower shattered the law, the backlash sending Tiberius stumbling back in shock. The pressure on Nami and Robin lifted. Now, Naruto yelled, do it, while he charged forward, engaging Tiberius in a blindingly fast physical and conceptual battle. Nami and Robin rushed to the humming, glowing machine. It was covered in glyphs, an ancient language that made Robin's heart pound. It's a variant of the poneglyph script, she exclaimed, her hands flying over the surface, translating with a desperate speed. It's not just a weapon. It's a broadcast device. The energy core is unstable, it's designed to cascade if tampered with. He's rigged it to self-destruct if he fails. I can feel it, Nami said, her eyes closed. She wasn't using her eyes. But her navigator's sixth sense, her deep connection to the world's energy, now restored. The power, it flows like a weather front. There are three main currents, converging on a central point. A low-pressure system, in the core. If we can disrupt the flow from those three nodes simultaneously, we might be able to divert the energy instead of stopping it. Robin's fingers found a passage. She's right. The control glyphs speak of redirecting the broadcast. We can change the message. It was a race against time. Naruto was a blur of gold, his Rasengans and Sag-E techniques clashing against Tiberius's reality warping laws. Tiberius created a law stating, all energy returns to its source, causing Naruto's own jutsu to fly back at him. Naruto countered by absorbing the attack, using his mastery of sage energy to make it his own. It was a battle of philosophies made manifest. Robin, the coordinates of the nodes. Nami yelled, pulling out a set of delicate precision tools Usopp had designed for disarming complex mechanisms. Left, 3 hand spans up. Right, 2 down, and the main one is dead center, behind that primary crystal. Robin directed, her mind processing the ancient text faster than she had ever thought possible. With the world shaking from the force of Naruto's battle, Nami went to work. Her fingers, usually used for drawing delicate lines on a map, danced across the ancient machine, her touch sure and certain. She wasn't just disarming a bomb, she was navigating the currents of a hurricane of pure energy. Now, she screamed, as she unlocked the final panel. Robin, her part done, slammed her hand down on a large, master glyph on the console. To all the world, she cried, her voice filled with the weight of 800 years of silence. Hear the truth of the void century. Naruto, seeing his chance, broke off his attack. He formed a final Rasengan, but instead of striking Tiberius, he slammed it into the now exposed energy core of the celestial silence. He wasn't trying to destroy it, he was pouring his own energy into the system, hijacking the broadcast and amplifying it 1,000-fold. Tiberius watched in horror, his perfect order unraveling into a beautiful, chaotic truth. The humming note of the machine changed, its frequency shifting. And across the world, every den mushi, every speaker, every receiver, began to broadcast not a wave of psychic erasure, but a story. It was Robin's voice, clear and unwavering, telling the world of the ancient kingdom, of the 20 kings who coveted its power, of the lie that had formed the foundation of the world government for 8 centuries. The battle outside Mary Geoise faltered as Marines and pirates alike stopped to listen. Kings in their castles, revolutionaries in their hidden bases, and ordinary people in their town squares all heard the forbidden truth. The celestial silence, its purpose subverted, began to overload. The throne room started to crumble. Luffy, Zoro, and Sanji burst in. Battered but victorious, Luffy saw the broken Tiberius, standing amidst the ruins of his dream. With a roar, Luffy stretched his arm back. This is for telling people they can't have dreams. His hockey-infused fist slammed into Tiberius, a final, physical exclamation point on an ideological victory. We have to go. The whole place is coming down. Nami yelled. They fled, escaping from the collapsing Pangaea castle, the truth of the world echoing in their wake. They reunited with their crew, fought their way back to the Sunny, and with the help of the Grand Fleet, made their escape into the chaotic, newly awakened seas. Days later, the 1,000 Sunny sailed on a calm, quiet sea. The world was in chaos, but it was a chaos born of liberation. Kingdoms were seceding, revolutions were sparking, and the monolithic power of the world government was shattered. The Straw Hats were no longer just pirates, they were world-changing revolutionaries, the most wanted and most celebrated people on the planet. The party had lasted for 3 straight days. Now, a comfortable peace had settled. The final scene was on the bow of the ship, as the sun began to set, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. Naruto stood at the railing, looking out at the horizon. Nami came to stand on his right, unfolding a fresh, blank piece of parchment. It was a new map, for a new world. She began to draw, a small, brilliant smile on her face. Robin came to stand on his left, opening a book whose pages were completely blank. It was a new history, waiting to be written. Naruto looked at the two incredible women at his side, his compass and his chronicle. He looked at the endless horizon before them, a future of infinite, unpredictable adventure. He had been a weapon, a savior, a monster, and a god. But here, now, sailing toward the dawn of a world they had helped to free, he was finally, simply, home. The maelstrom was at peace, anchored by two hearts, ready for whatever came next. Chapter 10 End.